The air in the hidden chamber tasted of dust and desperation. Ling Wei knelt before the celestial orb, its surface shimmering with captured starlight that danced across the rough-hewn stone walls. His eunuch's robes, simple grey cotton worn thin at the elbows, felt like a prison uniform, one he'd worn for 3 years while playing the part of a nobody in the Celestial Empire's sprawling palace. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the orb. Not from excitement, but from the bone-deep weariness that came with 9,999 consecutive failures. The chamber, tucked behind a false wall in the palace's oldest archives, was barely large enough for him to kneel upright. Shelves lined with crumbling scrolls surrounded him, their parchment whispering secrets he'd long since memorized. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows that made the celestial orb seem to breathe. One more, he thought, the words bitter on his tongue. Just one more piece of trash to add to the collection. He'd started counting after the first 1,000 failures. By the 5,000th, he'd begun documenting each worthless pull in a hidden ledger, his meticulous handwriting recording every chipped ceramic bowl, every faded silk thread, every cracked inkstone, the palace whispered about his cursed luck, the eunuch who couldn't pull anything better than common trash. They laughed behind their sleeves, not knowing the shadow chancellor hid beneath the humble robes. Ling Wei closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ritual settle into his bones. He'd performed this same motion 9,999 times before. Press palm to orb. Channel the barest trickle of celestial energy. Wait for the glow. Watch as disappointment materialized from thin air. His palm met the cool surface. The orb responded immediately, its internal light shifting from soft silver to the pale blue of a winter sky. Energy prickled up his arm, not the thrilling surge the courtiers described when they pulled S-ranks during public ceremonies, but the same feeble trickle he'd felt every day for years. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Dust motes froze in the lamplight. Then it appeared. Not with a flash or fanfare, but with the sad plink of something worthless hitting stone. Broken jade token, F. The token lay at the base of the orb, its green surface spiderwebbed with cracks, one corner completely missing. Ling Wei stared at it. His 10,000th failure. His 10,000th piece of garbage. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. The number echoed in his skull, 10,000. Enough failures to fill a warehouse. Enough to make lesser men abandon the Gacha system entirely. He reached for the token, his movements mechanical. His fingers closed around the cool jade. He should feel something, anger, despair, resignation. Instead, there was only the hollow ache that had lived in his chest since his first failed pull. He turned the token over, examining the cracks. It would be worth less than a day's rice ration. Another entry in the ledger. Another day playing the cursed eunuch. That's when the orb changed. It began as a faint pulse, deep within the celestial sphere. A heartbeat of crimson light that flashed once and vanished. Ling Wei froze, the broken token forgotten in his hand. He'd never seen the orb react after a pull completed. The ritual always ended when the item materialized. Another pulse. Stronger this time. The crimson light bloomed from the orb's core, spreading through its crystalline structure like blood through water. The chamber's shadows twisted and fled, replaced by the growing red glow. The air grew heavy, pressing against Ling Wei's skin with tangible weight. The dust on the shelves began to vibrate, making the scrolls tremble. What is this? Ling Wei's thoughts raced. A malfunction? A trap? He tried to pull his hand away from the orb, but his palm stuck fast, held by some invisible force. The crimson light intensified, painting the entire chamber in shades of blood and fire. The oil lamp's flame guttered and died, leaving only the orb's unnatural illumination. Heat radiated from the sphere, not the warmth of sunlight, but the searing heat of a forge. Then the voice came. Not from the orb, not from the chamber, but from inside his own mind. It spoke in tones of grinding stone and shifting constellations, each word vibrating through his bones. Pity threshold reached. Analyzing failure pattern. 10,000 consecutive failures detected. Activating Mercury protocol. The words burned themselves into Ling Wei's consciousness. Pity threshold. Mercy protocol. He'd heard whispers of the pity system, the celestial guarantee that after enough failures, something valuable would eventually drop. But the priest spoke of it in vague terms, never specifying numbers, never describing the mechanism. Most considered it a myth to keep the hopeless pulling. Selecting compensation drop. Accessing celestial archives. Error, standard compensation insufficient. Escalating to catastrophic failure reward tier. The orb's light became blinding. Ling Wei squeezed his eyes shut, but the crimson glow penetrated his eyelids, painting his vision red. The heat intensified until sweat beaded on his forehead and dripped down his neck, soaking into his eunuch's collar. The stone beneath his knees grew warm. The scrolls on the shelves began to smolder at the edges, filling the chamber with the acrid scent of burning parchment. Compensation selected, Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+. Warning, ultra-rare drop. Warning, consequences unmapped. Warning, irreversible bond detected. The voice ceased. For one heartbeat, there was only silence and the blinding light. Then the orb shattered. Not exploded, shattered. Like glass struck by a hammer. 1,000 crystalline fragments hung in the air, each glowing with captured crimson light. They hung there, suspended, forming a perfect sphere where the orb had been. Then they shot toward Ling Wei. He had no time to react. The fragments struck him not as physical objects, but as bolts of pure energy. They passed through his robes, his skin, his flesh, without leaving marks. Each impact felt like a needle of ice driven directly into his soul. He gasped, his back arching, his hands flying up instinctively to protect his face. But there was nothing to protect against, the fragments were already inside him. The pain was beyond anything he'd experienced. It wasn't the pain of injury, but the pain of something being torn open and rewired. His mind fractured. Memories flashed, his first failed pull, the laughter of courtiers, the weight of the shadow chancellor's mantle he'd abandoned to hide as a eunuch. Then new sensations flooded in. A throne room. Gold and jade. The scent of sandalwood incense. The feel of silk against skin that wasn't his. The weight of a crown. The murmur of courtiers bowing. The taste of tea, oolong, slightly bitter. Emperor Xian's senses. Ling Wei's eyes flew open. He still knelt in the chamber, surrounded by smoldering scrolls and fading crimson light. But he also stood in the throne room, looking out at bowed heads through Emperor Xian's eyes. The duality was dizzying. He could feel the rough stone beneath his own knees and the polished jade floor beneath the emperor's feet simultaneously. He could hear the rustle of his own robes and the whisper of the emperor's dragon-embroidered sleeves. The connection wasn't just sensory. He could feel the emperor's thoughts as faint whispers at the edge of his consciousness. Not clear words, but emotions, boredom from the endless court formalities, a flicker of anxiety about the upcoming meeting with Grand Chancellor Li, the dull ache of a headache beginning behind the eyes. Ling Wei focused on that anxiety. The emperor's worry about the meeting. He didn't know how to use this new power, but instinct guided him. He formed a thought, not in words, but in pure intention, a subtle suggestion, like planting a seed in fertile soil. The meeting should be delayed. The emperor is unwell. He pushed the thought through the connection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Emperor Xian shifted on the throne, a hand rising to massage his temple. The emperor's voice, heard through the emperor's own ears, spoke to the chamberlain standing nearby. Postpone the meeting with Grand Chancellor Li until tomorrow. This headache. The chamberlain bowed. As your majesty commands. The connection held. Ling Wei could still see through the emperor's eyes, still feel the silk of imperial robes, still taste the oolong tea. He experimented, shifting his attention. The connection remained stable, undiminished. He tried to push another suggestion, something stronger, but found resistance. The bond allowed subtle influence, not direct control. Planting seeds, not issuing commands. He withdrew his attention from the emperor's senses, focusing back on the chamber. The crimson light had faded completely, leaving only the oily darkness and the glowing embers of burning scrolls. The celestial orb was gone, only a circle of scorched stone marked where it had floated. The broken jade token still lay where he dropped it. Ling Wei stared at his hands. They looked the same, pale, slender, the hands of a eunuch who'd never done hard labor. But everything had changed. 10,000 failures. 10,000 pieces of trash. And now this, not a weapon, not armor, not some flashy S-rank ability to show off in court. Something better. Something invisible. The ultimate spy tool. A slow smile spread across his face. It felt strange after years of maintaining the eunuch's carefully neutral expression. The cursed luck wasn't a curse at all. It was a grind. A long, painful, humiliating grind to reach a pity threshold no one else would ever bother reaching. While the courtiers chased flashy drops, he'd accumulated failure after failure, building toward this moment. He stood, his knees protesting after kneeling so long. The chamber was a mess, burning scrolls, scorched stone, the lingering scent of ozone and ash. He'd need to clean it before anyone discovered this place. But first, he reached for his hidden ledger, the one documenting all 10,000 failures. He opened it to a fresh page. His hand, steady now, wrote the new entry. Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+. Then he paused. What to write as description? Psychic link to Emperor Xian seemed too blunt. Undetectable influence over the throne captured it better. He added a note, tested, successful suggestion to delay meeting. Connection stable. Limits unknown. He closed the ledger, hiding it back in its compartment behind a loose stone. The burning scrolls needed attention. He began gathering them, smothering the embers with his robes. As he worked, his mind raced with possibilities. This changed everything. The Shadow Chancellor's game had just gained the ultimate piece. He could monitor the Emperor directly. Influence decisions subtly. Gather intelligence no spy network could ever obtain. And the pity system. If 10,000 failures granted an SSS plus drop, what would 20,000 grant? 50,000. The public Gacha rituals, the massive ceremonies where the Empire pooled resources for legendary pulls, those were opportunities. Not to succeed, but to fail spectacularly. To accumulate pity on a grand scale while everyone laughed at the cursed eunuch's misfortune. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the sound. Voices. From the archives beyond the false wall. Ling Wei froze, a half-burned scroll clutched in his hand. He wasn't supposed to be here. The archives were closed after sunset. Only the night watch made rounds, and they wouldn't be whispering. He crept to the false wall, pressing his ear against the wood. The voices came clearer now, two men, speaking in hushed tones. Not the night watch. Their voices carried the cultivated accents of high-ranking eunuchs, the kind who served directly under the imperial family. Tonight, during the changing of the guard, the first voice said. The West Garden, where the Emperor takes his evening walk. Are you certain? The second voice asked, tension threading through the words. The guards there are loyal. Not all of them. Li's gold buys many loyalties. The captain has been persuaded. A chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature crept down Ling Wei's spine. Assassination. Tonight. Emperor Xian in the West Garden. And our role? The second eunuch asked. Ensure the night watch is distracted. A fire in the eastern kitchen should suffice. When the alarm sounds, the garden guards will thin. What if he survives? He won't. The assassins are using Phantom Dagger, pulled from the Celestial Gacha last week. Leaves no trace, kills silently. By the time anyone finds the body, we'll be mourning an emperor and swearing allegiance to whoever Grand Chancellor Li places on the throne. The voices began to fade, moving away through the archives. Ling Wei remained pressed against the false wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Emperor's death tonight. An assassination using a Gacha-pulled weapon. And he'd just gained the ability to save him. He looked down at his hands again. The hands that had pulled 10,000 failures. The hands that now held strings connected to the Emperor's mind. The game had begun. And the first move needed to be made tonight. The scent of sandalwood incense hung thick in Ling Wei's cramped eunuch quarters, a single sliver of moonlight cutting through the paper window to illuminate dust motes dancing in the air. He sat cross-legged on his thin sleeping mat, eyes closed, but his consciousness was elsewhere, tethered to the young emperor like a phantom limb. Through Emperor Xian's eyes, the world was a wash of gold and crimson. The imperial audience hall stretched before him, pillars of carved dragonwood reaching toward a ceiling painted with celestial constellations. Courtiers in embroidered silks knelt in precise rows, their heads bowed like fields of wheat before a storm. Ling Wei felt the emperor's heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat against his own calm rhythm. Xian's fingers, hidden within voluminous sleeves, trembled with barely contained agitation. Focus, Ling Wei thought, the command rippling through their psychic link like a stone dropped into still water. He didn't speak words, the connection didn't work that way. Instead, he planted impressions, the cool touch of jade, the steady drip of water in a quiet garden, the memory of a childhood tutor's calm voice reciting poetry. Subtle suggestions, woven into the fabric of Xian's consciousness. Grand Chancellor Li stood before the throne, his posture deceptively humble. The man wore robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver cranes, a symbol of longevity that felt like mockery. Li's voice carried through the hall, smooth as oiled silk. Your Majesty, the western provinces report another failed harvest. The celestial Gacha rituals performed there yielded only F-rank seeds. The people grow restless. Ling Wei felt Xian's anger spike, a hot, jagged thing. The Emperor's thoughts tumbled, he's blaming me. Again. As if I control what the heavens grant. Through their link, Ling Wei saw more than Xian did. He noticed how Li's eyes flickered toward the celestial Gacha priest standing at the hall's periphery. Noticed the slight nod one priest gave, almost imperceptible. A coordinated performance. Li was pushing, testing the young emperor's limits, perhaps hoping for an outburst that would undermine Xian's authority before the entire court. Breathe, Ling Wei suggested, pouring the sensation of deep, measured breaths into Xian's awareness. He felt the strain of maintaining the connection, a dull ache beginning behind his own eyes, like the first warning of a migraine. The Imperial Puppet Strings demanded mental energy, a currency he couldn't afford to spend recklessly. But letting Xian explode here would be worse. Xian's fingers stilled. The Emperor took a visible breath, the movement slight but noticeable to those watching. The heavens grant what they will, Xian said, his voice steadier than Ling Wei had expected. We shall dispatch additional supplies from the imperial granaries. And I will personally oversee the next Gacha ceremony in the capital, perhaps our sincerity will move the celestial beings to grant better fortune. Li's smile didn't reach his eyes. As your Majesty commands. The audience continued, but the tension had shifted. Ling Wei withdrew slightly from the link, leaving just enough connection to monitor Xian's emotional state. The mental strain lingered, a persistent throb behind his temples. He opened his own eyes in his quarters, the sudden shift from golden hall to dim room momentarily disorienting. He needed information. The assassination plot Eunuch Zhang and Wang had whispered about, tonight, in the West Garden. A phantom dagger, a distraction fire. Ling Wei rose silently, his movements practiced and soundless. From beneath a loose floorboard, he retrieved a small clay token carved with a spider's web, the signal for his hidden spy network. An hour later, in the abandoned bell tower overlooking the palace's western sector, Ling Wei met with three shadows. They wore the plain robes of minor servants, their faces obscured by the deep gloom. No names were exchanged, that was the rule. Zhang and Wang, Ling Wei whispered, the words barely audible. They serve Grand Chancellor Li. I need everything on their movements today. Especially anything involving the West Garden or fire-starting materials. One shadow nodded. Zhang visited the armory this afternoon. Signed out ceremonial torches under the pretext of preparing for the Moon Festival. Another spoke, voice raspy. Wang met with a guardsman from the western gate. Exchanged a pouch that clinked like coins. Ling Wei processed this. The distraction fire would come from the ceremonial torches. The guardsman's cooperation bought. And the phantom dagger, an assassin's weapon that left no physical wound, only spiritual decay. Li wasn't just testing Xian's temper in court, he was moving to eliminate the emperor entirely. Monitor them, Ling Wei instructed. But do not interfere. I'll handle the garden. As dusk settled over the celestial empire, painting the palace roofs in shades of violet and indigo, Ling Wei moved through the servant passages like a ghost. His espionage training served him well, he knew which corridors echoed, which guards patrolled when, which hidden alcoves offered temporary concealment. The West Garden was Emperor Xian's favorite retreat, a place of curated wilderness with winding paths, artificial streams, and pavilions shaped like blooming lotuses. Ling Wei positioned himself in a gnarled wisteria tree whose ancient branches offered a view of the main path. He activated Eavesdropper's Echo, focusing his enhanced hearing toward the garden's entrance. The skill came with immediate cost, a wave of fatigue washed over him, making his limbs feel heavy. He couldn't maintain this long. Footsteps. 2 sets. Zhang and Wang approached, their voices hushed but clear to Ling Wei's magically attuned ears. The fire starts at the eastern storage shed, Zhang was saying. That should draw half the guards. And the dagger? Wang asked. Our man has it. He'll be waiting in the moon viewing pavilion. When Xian comes to admire the night blossoms as he always does. Zhang made a soft, slicing sound. Ling Wei's mind raced. He could warn Xian directly through their link, but that might alert the emperor to the psychic connection's full extent. Better to handle this subtly. He withdrew from the eavesdropping skill, the fatigue receding slightly. Through his link with Xian, he planted another suggestion: the North Garden has rarer night-blooming jasmine tonight. Worth seeing. He felt Xian's acknowledgement, a faint shift in attention. Good. The Emperor would change his routine. But Ling Wei needed more than to avert one assassination. He needed to trace this back to Li, to find proof that could unravel the entire conspiracy. As Zhang and Wang moved to prepare their distraction fire, Ling Wei slipped from the tree and headed not toward the garden, but toward the administrative wing where Grand Chancellor Li maintained his offices. The corridors here were better lit, with lanterns casting pools of warm light. Ling Wei moved from shadow to shadow, his eunuch's robes blending with the darkness. He passed two celestial Gacha priests deep in conversation, their ritual headdresses glittering with embedded crystals that supposedly channeled celestial energy. One priest glanced his way, but Ling Wei bowed his head in proper servant deference, and the man looked away. Li's office was guarded, but not impenetrably. The Chancellor believed in the illusion of accessibility, a single guard at the door, more for ceremony than security. Ling Wei watched from an alcove as the guard was relieved by his replacement. During the 30-second exchange, when both men were distracted by the transfer of duty, Ling Wei darted past, slipping through the heavy oak door before it fully closed. The office smelled of ink and ambition. Scrolls filled shelves that reached the ceiling. A massive desk of dark heartwood dominated the room, its surface meticulously organized. Ling Wei moved quickly but methodically, his trained eyes scanning for anything out of place. He found the hidden compartment beneath the third drawer on the right, a classic placement, almost too obvious. But when he pressed the concealed latch, the panel slid open to reveal not documents, but a small celestial orb, dormant and dark. A decoy. Ling Wei smiled faintly. Li was clever, but not clever enough. He examined the desk's carvings, dragons chasing pearls along the edges. One pearl was slightly darker than the others, worn smooth by frequent touching. He pressed it. A section of the bookshelf behind the desk swung inward with a soft click. The hidden space beyond was narrow, barely large enough for a single person to stand. Inside, a simple lacquer box sat on a pedestal. Ling Wei lifted the lid. Ledgers. Dozens of them, bound in plain leather. He opened the top one, his eyes scanning columns of dates, names, and amounts. The entries detailed bribes, systematic, extensive. Payments to celestial Gacha priests to influence ritual outcomes. Payments to minor officials for favorable reports. Payments to Eunuch Zhang and Wang, listed under special services. But it was the final entries that made Ling Wei's breath catch. Celestial Envoy Liaison, Dynasty Reset Project. First installment delivered. The amount was astronomical. And next to it, a single character, Heaven. Li wasn't just conspiring to overthrow Xian. He was working with the celestial beings themselves on something called Dynasty Reset. The true scale of the conspiracy unfolded before Ling Wei like a poisonous flower blooming in the dark. He needed to take this ledger. Proof. But as he reached for it, a low growl echoed in the office beyond the hidden room. Ling Wei froze. He hadn't heard the office door open. Through the crack in the bookshelf, he saw movement, a sleek, dark shape padding across the polished floor. A guard dog, but unlike any ordinary hound. This creature's eyes glowed with faint celestial energy, and its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air. Enchanted senses. Li had invested in more than human guards. The dog turned toward the bookshelf. Its growl deepened. It had caught his scent. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble courtyard of the celestial palace, turning the intricate carvings of dragons and phoenixes into sharp-edged silhouettes. Ling Wei stood among the rows of eunuchs lining the perimeter, his plain grey robes indistinguishable from dozens of others. Yet his eyes missed nothing, the way the morning light caught the gold embroidery on the nobles' robes, the subtle tension in the shoulders of the celestial priests arranging the ritual array, the faint scent of incense that couldn't quite mask the smell of ambition. Today was the monthly auspicious pull, a public spectacle where the empire's elite gathered to demonstrate their favor with the heavens. Ling Wei watched as Duke Feng stepped forward, his ceremonial robes billowing in the gentle breeze. The Duke placed his hands on the celestial orb, a sphere of polished jade that shimmered with internal light, and closed his eyes. The orb glowed golden, then erupted in a shower of light that coalesced into a floating scroll. The crowd murmured appreciatively as the priest announced, Celestial Strategy Treatise, S rank. The heavens favored Duke Feng's wisdom. Ling Wei's fingers tightened imperceptibly within his sleeves. Another S rank for someone who already had 3. Another display of the system's capricious nature. He remembered his own 10,000 failures, the broken tokens, the rusted weapons, the useless trinkets that filled a hidden chest in his quarters. Each one had been a lesson in patience, a stone laid on the path to his true power. His turn came as the lower-ranking officials and servants were called forward. He stepped up to the secondary orb, a smaller, less ornate version used for those without noble blood. The priest beside it, a man with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, barely glanced at him. "Name and rank," he muttered, already looking past Ling Wei to the next in line. "Ling Wei, junior archivist of the 3rd class," he said softly, his voice carefully modulated to sound appropriately humble. The priest made a mark on his ledger. "Proceed." Ling Wei placed his hands on the cool surface of the orb. He could feel the celestial energy humming within it, a vibration that traveled up his arms. In his mind's eye, he visualized the pity counter, a number only he could see, ticking upward with each failure. Currently it stood at 10,100. 100 pulls since the Imperial Puppet Strings. 100 deliberate, calculated losses. He focused his will not on summoning something powerful, but on the opposite. He imagined the energy dissipating, scattering like smoke in the wind. He pictured the most worthless item he could conceive, a cracked clay bowl, a frayed rope, a single copper coin worn smooth by time. The orb's light flickered uncertainly, shifting from its usual white glow to a sickly yellow. It pulsed once, twice, then emitted a weak puff of smoke that resolved into a small, tarnished bell with a crack running down its side. The priest sighed. "Rust-worn temple bell, F rank." "Next." A few nobles nearby chuckled, their laughter like the tinkling of wind chimes, light, airy, and utterly condescending. Ling Wei bowed his head, the perfect picture of dejected acceptance. But within, he felt the satisfaction of a master craftsman watching a complex mechanism click into place. The pity counter ticked up to 10,101. As he stepped back into line, he noticed Grand Chancellor Li watching from the raised dais where the highest nobles gathered. Li's expression was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on Ling Wei a moment too long. Was it suspicion? Or merely the Chancellor's habit of noting everything and everyone? Ling Wei kept his gaze lowered, his posture subservient. The spider does not reveal its web until the fly is caught. The ritual continued, a parade of fortune and failure. Marquis Zhao obtained a phoenix feather quill, A rank, that would enhance his calligraphy with celestial inspiration. Lady May pulled a mist veil, B rank, that would hide her features from unwanted attention. A minor official from the Treasury Department failed spectacularly, producing only a handful of dust that made him cough violently. Then came the disruption Ling Wei had been waiting for. As the ritual reached its midpoint, the head priest began the ceremonial blessing of the main orb. This was always the most delicate part, the moment when celestial energy was most concentrated, most volatile. Ling Wei had positioned himself near one of the incense braziers, its smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. He'd spent the previous night subtly adjusting the brazier's stand, ensuring one leg was slightly shorter than the others. Now, as the priest's chant reached its crescendo, Ling Wei stumbled. It was a masterful performance, a slight misstep, a flailing arm that caught the edge of the brazier. The metal stand wobbled, teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then toppled with a crash that echoed across the courtyard. Hot coals scattered across the marble, sending up showers of sparks. The incense burner itself rolled toward the ritual array, trailing smoke and embers. Chaos erupted. Priests shouted, rushing to contain the scattered fire. Nobles stepped back, their fine robes fluttering like startled birds. The head priest's chant broke off mid-syllable, the sudden silence more jarring than any noise. The celestial orbs flickered wildly, their light dimming and brightening in erratic pulses. "You clumsy fool," the head priest roared, his face purpling with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Ling Wei, who had fallen to his knees in a convincing display of terror. "Forgive this unworthy one," Ling Wei cried, pressing his forehead to the cold marble. "The stone was uneven, I lost my footing." "The ritual is contaminated," another priest wailed. "The celestial alignment is broken." Ling Wei kept his head down, but through slitted eyes he watched the orbs. The energy they'd been gathering was dissipating, leaking away into the air like water from a cracked vessel. And with it went the potential pulls of everyone present. 99 nobles and officials who would have obtained items today would now receive nothing. Their failures would be recorded, their pity counters, for those few who understood the system's deeper mechanics, would increment. And his own. As the instigator of the disruption, the system registered the event as a mass failure event. His pity counter jumped, 10,102. 10,103, 10,104. It climbed steadily as the priests tried to salvage the ritual, finally stabilizing at 10,200. 100 pity accumulated in a single stroke. Guards dragged Ling Wei to his feet. He didn't resist, letting his body go limp in their grasp. They hauled him before the head priest, who glared down at him with eyes like chips of obsidian. This interference with a celestial ritual is a grave offense, the priest hissed. You could be flogged. Dismissed from service. Worse. Ling Wei trembled, not entirely in act, for the danger was real. But he'd calculated this too. Esteemed priest, he whispered, his voice shaking. This lowly one knows his offense is unforgivable. But perhaps my clumsiness revealed a flaw in the courtyard stones. A hazard that might have caused greater tragedy during the grand ritual next month. He saw the calculation in the priest's eyes. The monthly auspicious pull was one thing. The grand ritual was another, an event attended by celestial envoys themselves, where the stakes were infinitely higher. A disruption then would mean more than embarrassment, it would mean the priest's head. After a long moment, the priest waved a dismissive hand. 1 month's wages docked. And you will personally inspect every stone in this courtyard before the grand ritual. If so much as a pebble is out of place, it will be your skin that covers the gap. Now get out of my sight. The guards released him. Ling Wei bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees, then scurried away like the frightened mouse he appeared to be. Only when he'd rounded a corner and was out of sight did he allow himself to straighten, to feel the cold satisfaction settling in his chest. 100 pity. Another step toward his next goal. But business remained. The ledger he discovered in Li's office, the one detailing bribes to priests and officials, the one that mentioned the Dynasty Reset project, needed further examination. He'd barely had time to glance at it before the enchanted guard dog had discovered him. He'd escaped, but the ledger had been left behind. Now he needed to find what it pointed to. His psychic link with Emperor Xian hummed softly in the back of his mind, a constant low-level connection that let him sense the Emperor's general state. Xian was in his study, reviewing petitions. Bored, slightly frustrated, but safe. Ling Wei sent a gentle pulse of calm through the link, a suggestion that the Emperor take tea with honey. He felt Xian's mood lift slightly, followed by the mental equivalent of a nod. The strain of maintaining the link was there, a faint headache beginning to form behind Ling Wei's eyes, but it was manageable. He made his way to the Imperial Archives, the one place where a junior archivist wouldn't be questioned for poking through old records. The archives occupied the entire west wing of the palace's second floor, a labyrinth of shelves that stretched into shadowy recesses, filled with scrolls, ledgers, and artifacts dating back centuries. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the high windows, and the air smelled of aged paper, ink, and the faint, sweet scent of preservative herbs. Ling Wei moved through the familiar aisles with quiet efficiency. He needed to find references to celestial artifacts mentioned in Li's ledger, specifically, an item called the Stellar Compass, that had been logged as transferred to deep storage, section Gamma, under Celestial Seal. The ledger had included a partial reference number, Gamma 7-22. Section Gamma was the oldest part of the archives, a series of chambers that had been sealed during the reign of Emperor Xian's grandfather. Officially, they contained nothing but outdated tax records and obsolete decrees. Unofficially, well, that was what Ling Wei needed to discover. He found the entrance to Section Gamma behind a tapestry depicting the Empire's founding myth, the first emperor receiving the celestial mandate from a being of light. The tapestry was heavy with centuries of dust, and when Ling Wei pulled it aside, the movement stirred up clouds that made him cough softly. Behind it was a door of dark wood, bound with iron bands that showed faint traces of rust. Most importantly, the door bore a celestial seal, a circle of silver inlay that pulsed with a soft, blue light. Ling Wei studied the seal. It was a standard preservation ward, designed to alert the celestial priests if broken. But Li's ledger had mentioned the seal being modified, a bribe paid to ensure it could be bypassed by those who knew the method. Ling Wei ran his fingers over the silver inlay, feeling the minute imperfections in the metal. There. A slight depression near the bottom, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. He pressed it. The blue light flickered, shifted to green for a heartbeat, then returned to blue. The ward remained active, but now it would ignore his presence. Another of Li's preparations, another thread in the conspiracy. The door swung open on silent hinges. Beyond lay darkness so complete it seemed solid. Ling Wei lit a small lantern, its light shielded by a hood of dark fabric, and stepped inside. Section Gamma was not what he expected. Instead of shelves of scrolls, he found a single long chamber lined with pedestals. On each pedestal rested an artifact, each covered by a dome of crystal that shimmered with containment fields. He moved down the line, reading the plaques at the base of each pedestal. Shattered Moon Mirror, EX rank, Celestial Artifact, Unstable, sealed by decree of Emperor Liang. Whispering Bell of Lost Dynasties, SSS rank, records the fall of 3 previous empires, listening may induce madness. Heart of the Mountain God, SSS rank, contains the dormant consciousness of a territorial deity. And there, on the 22nd pedestal, Stellar Compass, SSS rank, celestial navigation device, can chart courses through fate itself. Warning, use may attract attention of celestial observers. The compass itself was beautiful in a stark, functional way. A disk of dark metal etched with constellations that glowed with their own inner light, surrounded by rotating rings marked with celestial symbols. Even through the containment field, Ling Wei could feel its power, a low hum that vibrated in his bones. But more interesting than the compass was what lay beside it on the pedestal. Not another artifact, but a ledger. A twin to the one he'd seen in Li's office, bound in the same dark leather, marked with the same celestial sigil on its cover. This must be the master copy, the one Li consulted. Ling Wei reached for it. His fingers passed through the containment field with only a slight tingling sensation, the modified seal again. He lifted the ledger, its weight substantial in his hands. He opened it to a random page. And froze. The page showed not lists of bribes or project plans, but diagrams. Complex, interlocking circles filled with celestial mathematics. And at the center of each diagram, a representation of the Gacha system itself, the orbs, the pulls, the flow of fate energy. Arrows pointed from the system to symbols representing harvest points and control nodes. Notes in a cramped, precise hand detailed energy extraction rates and optimal failure induction protocols. This wasn't just a record of corruption. This was a blueprint. A blueprint for manipulating the Gacha system on a scale Ling Wei had never imagined. The Dynasty Reset project wasn't merely Li's ambition, it was something far larger, with the celestial envoys not as manipulators in the background, but as active participants. They were using the Gacha system not just to distribute power, but to harvest something from the failures. From the pity. His own pity. His 10,000 failures. The energy that had accumulated to grant him the Imperial Puppet Strings, had that been harvested too? Was his bad luck not a curse, but a crop being tended by unseen farmers? The thought was ice in his veins. He flipped through more pages, his eyes scanning the dense text. References to pity reservoirs and system overflow events. Notes about subject Ling, him, with observations about his unusually high failure consistency and optimal pity accumulation rate. They'd been watching him. Studying him. His entire life as a shadow chancellor, his decade of hiding as a eunuch, his 10,000 pulls, all of it observed, recorded, analyzed. He needed to get this ledger out. He needed to study it properly, to understand the full scope of what he'd stumbled into. He tucked it under his robe, the bulk of it hidden by the loose fabric. He took one last look at the stellar compass, its constellations glowing mockingly in the darkness, then turned to leave. As he stepped back through the door into the main archives, he felt it. A sharp, stabbing pain behind his eyes, like a needle driven deep into his brain. It was followed by a sensation of violation, something probing, searching, testing the edges of his psychic link with Emperor Xian. The link itself, usually a quiet stream of awareness, suddenly felt exposed, like a nerve laid bare to the air. Ling Wei staggered, catching himself against a shelf. Scrolls rattled in their slots. The pain intensified, becoming a white-hot brand searing through his consciousness. Through the agony, he could feel the probe, cold, methodical, utterly alien. It wasn't human. It carried the same feeling as the celestial energy in the Gacha orbs, but magnified, refined, intelligent. It traced the connection from him to Xian, following the psychic thread back to its source. Ling Wei threw up every mental barrier he could muster, drawing on years of espionage training to hide his thoughts, to cloak his presence. He imagined walls of shadow, labyrinths of misdirection, mirrors that reflected nothing but empty space. The probe hesitated. Tested a barrier. Found it solid. Tested another. Ling Wei felt sweat beading on his forehead, dripping into his eyes. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. The probe pressed harder, and one of his mental barriers cracked with a soundless shatter that echoed through his skull. He was losing. Whatever this was, it was too powerful, too focused. It would find him. It would find the link. It would find everything. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the probe withdrew. The pain vanished, leaving behind only a throbbing ache and the chilling certainty of having been seen. Not fully identified, perhaps. Not understood. But noticed. Ling Wei slumped against the shelf, his robe soaked with cold sweat. In the silence of the archives, broken only by his own harsh breathing, a single thought crystallized in his mind. The celestial envoys weren't just manipulating the system from behind the scenes. They were watching. And now they'd caught his scent. The morning after the archives incident, Ling Wei woke to a throbbing headache that felt like shards of glass grinding behind his eyes. The celestial probe had left its mark, a dull, persistent ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He lay on his simple pallet in a eunuch's quarters, listening to the distant sounds of palace life, the shuffle of feet on polished stone, the murmur of servants, the faint chime of wind bells from the celestial observatory. He needed to move carefully. The celestial envoys had detected something, perhaps not his exact identity, but certainly an anomaly in the psychic fabric around the emperor. Ling Wei closed his eyes and focused inward, reaching for the silken thread of connection that bound him to Emperor Xian. The Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+, hummed with subtle energy, a vibration only he could perceive. Through it, he saw fragments, Xian sitting at his breakfast table, picking at steamed buns with disinterest, the emperor's hands, pale and slender, tracing patterns on the lacquered wood. Ling Wei planted the first suggestion as delicately as a spider spinning its web. Not a command, never a command, but a seed of thought. The treasury reports have been inconsistent lately. Grand Chancellor Li's expenditures seem disproportionate. He let the idea drift through the psychic link, wrapping it in the emperor's own growing paranoia about Li's ambitions. He felt the moment it took root, Xian's fingers stilled, his gaze turning inward. Good. Then Ling Wei began to cough. He made it sound wet and ragged, hacking into his sleeve until his face flushed with genuine strain. When the other eunuch stirred, he groaned and pressed a hand to his forehead. Fever, he muttered to no one in particular. Must have caught something in the archives last night. By mid-morning, his illness had been noted. The head eunuch assigned him light duties, sorting scrolls in a storage room far from the main corridors. Perfect isolation. Ling Wei shuffled through the dusty chamber, his movements slow and deliberate, while through the psychic link he watched Emperor Xian summon his ministers. The audience chamber was vast, with pillars carved to resemble coiling dragons ascending to a ceiling painted with celestial constellations. Xian sat on the dragon throne, a slight figure dwarfed by the ornate gold and jade. Grand Chancellor Li stood before him, robes of deep crimson embroidered with silver phoenixes, a subtle challenge to imperial dragons. Your Majesty, Li said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. The border fortifications require additional funding. The northern tribes grow restless. Ling Wei, sorting scrolls with trembling hands, pushed another suggestion through the strings. Ask about the last audit. The one from 3 moons ago, Xian's eyes narrowed. Before we discuss new expenditures, Chancellor Li, I would review the treasury audit from last season. The reports showed discrepancies in your ministry's allocations. A flicker of surprise crossed Li's face, quickly masked. Discrepancies, Your Majesty. The records are flawless. My scribes. I will have them re-examined, Xian said, the words coming with more force than Ling Wei had expected. The young emperor's frustration was a live wire, and Ling Wei's suggestion had tapped into it perfectly. A full audit. Starting today. Li bowed, but Ling Wei, watching through Xian's eyes, saw the tension in the chancellor's shoulders. The game was in motion. Alone in the storage room as afternoon shadows lengthened, Ling Wei felt the familiar pull, the celestial system's interface, invisible to all but him. His pity counter glowed in his mind's eye, 10,200. He needed more. But today, he needed something specific. Information. He focused on the desire to overhear, to listen unseen. The system responded. A minor ritual, just a whisper of intent, a flick of mental energy toward the celestial mechanics that governed this world. He felt the pity counter tick upward, 10,201. Then the drop. It wasn't like the Imperial Puppet Strings. No crimson glow, no shattering orbs. This was subtler, a vibration in his ears, a sudden sensitivity to sound that made the rustle of mice in the walls seem like thunder. Eavesdropper's echo, the description unfolded in his mind, * allows the user to overhear conversations at a distance, at the cost of proportional fatigue. Range, approximately 300 paces. Duration, limited by mental stamina, *. He tested it immediately, focusing on the corridor outside. 2 junior eunuchs were gossiping about the Emperor's sudden audit order. Their voices came through crisp and clear, as if they stood beside him. Ling Wei noted the strain, a tightening behind his eyes, a drain on his energy reserves. The cost was real. He waited until dusk, when the palace shifted into its evening rhythms. Through his spy network, a whispered word to a kitchen maid who owed him a favor, he learned Li had requested a private meeting in the Moon Viewing Pavilion, a secluded structure overlooking the Imperial Gardens. Far from prying ears. Or so Li thought. Ling Wei made his way there, keeping to shadows. His illness gave him excuse to move slowly, leaning against walls when guards passed. The fatigue from the eavesdropper's echo was already building, a leaden weight in his limbs, a fog threatening his thoughts. He pushed through. The Moon Viewing Pavilion stood on a small artificial hill, surrounded by carefully raked gravel and dwarf pines. Paper lanterns glowed softly within, casting moving shadows on the rice paper walls. Ling Wei positioned himself behind a large ornamental rock, 50 paces away. Close enough. He activated the skill. The world sharpened. The rustle of leaves became a roar. Distant water from a fountain crashed in his ears. He focused, filtering, narrowing his attention to the pavilion. 2 voices. Li's first, tense, detected an anomaly during the last probe. Something is shielding the Emperor. A second voice, unlike any human speech Ling Wei had heard. It seemed to vibrate from multiple directions at once, layered with harmonics that prickled at the edges of his mind. A celestial envoy. The failure patterns continue. Subject Ling Wei's consistency is notable. His pity accumulation accelerates. Ling Wei froze. They were discussing him by name. Li, he's just a eunuch with cursed luck. Why does he matter? Celestial envoy, you misunderstand the system, mortal. Failures are not waste. They are potential energy. The more he fails, the more pity he accumulates, the more power becomes available for harvesting. His 10,000th failure granted him Imperial Puppet Strings. Imagine what 20,000 might yield. Or 100,000. A pause. Ling Wei's heart hammered against his ribs. They knew about the strings. Or suspected. Li, the Dynasty Reset project requires massive energy infusion. Can his failures provide that? Celestial envoy, they are a component. But we must control the narrative. The audit you face today, that is his doing. We traced psychic residue to the Emperor's command. The eunuch is using his drop to manipulate the throne. Li's voice turned cold. Then he dies tonight. I have men watching him. They'll make it look like an accident, a fall, a robbery. No connection to me. Celestial envoy, ensure it is done before the grand ritual. His continued existence risks exposure. And remember, the reset requires the Emperor's willing participation during the celestial alignment. Keep Xian pliable. He will be, Li said. After the eunuch is gone. The conversation shifted to logistics, shipments of celestial ore, bribes to Gacha priests. Ling Wei listened, memorizing every detail even as the fatigue from eavesdropper's echo deepened into agony. His vision swam. Sweat soaked his simple robes. The skill was draining him dry, minute by minute. When the meeting ended, he deactivated it. The sudden silence was deafening. He slumped against the rock, breathing ragged. A full day's worth of exhaustion compressed into an hour. His muscles trembled. But he had what he needed. Confirmation of the plot, his own name in their mouths, and the timeline, they would move tonight. ******. He took the long way back to the eunuch's quarters, avoiding main paths. The palace at night was a different creature, shadowed arches, pools of darkness between lanterns, the occasional patrol of guards whose armor clinked softly. Ling Wei moved like a ghost, his espionage training overriding the fatigue. He noted the positions of guards, the patterns of their rounds. All normal. Until it wasn't. As he turned into a narrow corridor that connected the servant wings to the main palace, a shortcut he often used, he felt at first a prickle on the back of his neck. The corridor was deserted, lit only by a single lantern at the far end. The stones underfoot were worn smooth by centuries of passage. He took 3 steps before they emerged from alcoves on either side. 4 men. Not palace guards, their clothing was too plain, too dark. No insignia. But their movements were trained, fluid. Assassins. Each held a blade that glowed with faint celestial energy, Gacha-enhanced steel, probably, phantom dagger, variants or similar pulls. The light caught edges that seemed to blur in and out of perception. The leader stepped forward, a tall man with a scar across his jaw. "Eunuch Ling Wei," he said, voice flat. "You took a wrong turn." Ling Wei's mind raced. His fatigue was crippling. His espionage skills might let him take 1, maybe 2 in a surprise move, but 4 armed with enhanced blades? No. He had no combat drops, no weapons beyond his hands and wits. He backed against the wall, calculating. The corridor was narrow, only wide enough for 2 men to stand abreast. An advantage, if he could funnel them. But the fatigue, his thoughts moved through syrup. "Grand Chancellor Li sends his regrets," the scarred man said. "But you've been too curious." They advanced. The blades hummed with stored celestial energy, ready to cut through more than flesh. Ling Wei's eyes darted to the lantern at the far end. If he could reach it, smash it, plunge them into darkness. But the assassins were already closing. 2 in front, 2 hanging back to block retreat. The scarred man raised his blade. The glow intensified, casting sharp shadows on the stone walls. Ling Wei braced, every muscle screaming in protest. The eavesdropper's echo had left him hollowed out, but survival instinct burned through the fog. He had seconds. Maybe less. The blade descended. The first blade came from the left, a shimmering arc of celestial steel that sang through the stagnant air of the deserted corridor. Ling Wei didn't think, his body moved on instinct, years of espionage training overriding the fatigue that clung to his bones like wet silk. He dropped into a low crouch, feeling the whisper of the blade pass inches above his shaved scalp. The cold stone floor bit into his knees through the thin fabric of his eunuch's robes. 4 men surrounded him, their faces obscured by dark cloth masks that left only their eyes visible, flat, dead eyes that held no emotion beyond professional intent. They moved with the coordinated grace of hunters who had worked together for years. Ling Wei's breath came in short, controlled bursts. His mind, still aching from the strain of using eavesdropper's echo, earlier, scrambled for options. He had no combat-oriented gotcha drops. His inventory was a collection of subtle tools, psychic strings, eavesdropping echoes, espionage skills. None were made for open confrontation against 4 armed killers. "Think," he commanded himself, his back pressed against the cold palace wall. The corridor was narrow here, part of the older servant quarters where the lanterns burned low and infrequent. Shadows pooled in the corners like spilled ink. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and the faint metallic tang of the assassin's blades, Gacha-enhanced steel that glowed with a soft, ethereal light. Grand Chancellor Li wasn't taking chances. The assassin who had struck first adjusted his grip, the celestial steel humming with barely contained energy. Ling Wei noted the man's stance, weight forward, left foot slightly advanced, blade held in a middle guard. A standard imperial military form, but refined through repetition. These weren't common thugs, they were professionals, likely former palace guards or mercenaries bought with Li's considerable wealth. Ling Wei's fingers brushed against the rough stone behind him. He remembered this corridor from his early days as a shadow chancellor, before the Gacha curse, before the eunuch's disguise. There had been a hidden passage here, a remnant from a previous dynasty's paranoid architecture. He'd used it once to escape an early political purge. Was it still there? The memory felt fragile, blurred by years of failure and survival. The second assassin struck without warning, a thrust aimed at Ling Wei's midsection. Ling Wei twisted, the blade grazing his side and tearing through fabric. A line of fire bloomed along his ribs. He grunted, pushing off the wall to create distance. Blood, warm and sticky, began to seep through his robes. The cut wasn't deep, the assassin had pulled back at the last moment, perhaps wary of killing him too quickly in case they needed information. That hesitation was a mistake. Ling Wei's mind raced through possibilities. He could try to fight his way out using his espionage training, but against 4 enhanced blades, the odds were terrible. He could scream for help, but these corridors were deliberately isolated, part of why Li's men had chosen this location. No guards would come in time. Then he remembered the psychic link. Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+, hummed in the back of his consciousness, a constant, subtle connection to Emperor Xian. It was meant for manipulation, for subtle suggestions, not for combat. But necessity bred innovation. As the third assassin moved in from the right, Ling Wei closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Not to pray, he'd given up on celestial mercy 10,000 failed pulls ago, but to focus. He reached through the psychic link, not toward Emperor Xian's mind, but outward, toward the space around the assassins. The connection was slippery, designed for a single target, but he forced it, straining mental muscles that already screamed in protest. He planted a suggestion not in a person, but in the air itself, the sound of approaching Imperial guards. It was a crude, blunt use of the power. The psychic strings vibrated with protest, threatening to snap under the strain. Ling Wei felt a sharp pain behind his eyes, like needles being driven into his temples. But it worked. The assassins froze, their heads turning almost in unison toward the far end of the corridor. To them, the sound was unmistakable, the rhythmic tramp of armored boots, the jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of voices. The illusion was auditory only, no visual component, but in the dim, shadowy corridor, it was enough. "Guards," one of the assassins hissed, his voice tight with alarm. They hesitated, their professional discipline warring with self-preservation. Attacking a lowly eunuch was one thing, being caught by Imperial guards in the act was a death sentence that not even Li's protection could overturn. Ling Wei didn't wait. While their attention was divided, he dropped to the floor, ignoring the fresh flare of pain from his wounded side. His fingers scrabbled along the base of the wall, searching for the hidden trigger he half remembered. Dust filled his nostrils. The stone was cold and unyielding. One of the assassins shook his head, realizing the deception. "It's a trick. There's no one." Ling Wei's fingers found it, a slight irregularity in the mortar, a stone that sat just a fraction of an inch deeper than its neighbors. He pressed, putting all his weight into it. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting stone, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. Ling Wei didn't look back. He threw himself through the opening, rolling into the musty blackness as a blade struck the stone where his head had been, sending sparks flying. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Ling Wei scrambled forward on hands and knees, the rough stone scraping his palms. Behind him, he heard the assassins cursing, then the sound of one trying to squeeze through the opening. The man was too broad-shouldered, he got stuck almost immediately, his frustrated grunts echoing in the confined space. Ling Wei kept moving, driven by adrenaline and the certain knowledge that they would find another way around. The hidden passage smelled of damp earth and decay. His wounded side throbbed with every movement, leaving a trail of blood droplets on the stone. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber he remembered from years before, a forgotten storeroom for palace records, long since abandoned. He collapsed against a stack of moldering scrolls, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The psychic strain of misusing, Imperial Puppet Strings, combined with the physical exertion left him trembling. He pressed a hand to his side, feeling the warm seep of blood slowing to a trickle. The cut was shallow, but it would need cleaning and bandaging. Infection in these forgotten chambers could be as deadly as any assassin's blade. For several minutes, he simply sat in the darkness, listening. No sounds of pursuit reached him. Either the assassins had given up, or they were searching the main corridors, assuming he'd emerged elsewhere. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the distance and the frantic beating of his own heart. His mind, clearing slowly from the fog of combat, began to analyze. The attack confirmed what he'd learned from eavesdropping. Li knew about him, or at least suspected enough to want him dead. The celestial envoys were watching. And they were harvesting energy from his pity accumulation. His failures were feeding their dynasty reset project. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, echoing softly in the chamber. All those years of cursed luck, all those thousands of failed pulls, and now even his misfortune was being weaponized against him. The irony was almost beautiful in its cruelty. He needed to adapt. Imperial Puppet Strings was invaluable for manipulation, and Eavesdropper's Echo had just provided critical intelligence, but neither was suited for direct confrontation. The assassins today had been professionals, but what if next time Li sent someone with combat-oriented gacha drops? A warrior with Phoenix Blade, S, or Earthshaker Fist, SS. Ling Wei's espionage training would be useless against such power. He needed a combat drop of his own. And that meant more failures. More deliberate, public humiliation at Gacha rituals. More pity accumulation. The thought should have been galling. After 10,000 failures, the idea of seeking out more should have broken a lesser man. But Ling Wei had long since passed the point where pride mattered. Survival did. Control did. The unseen game he played with Li, with the celestial envoys, with the entire damned empire, that mattered. He began planning as he tended to his wound, tearing a strip from the hem of his inner robe to bind his side. The grand ritual was coming, the largest public Gacha ceremony of the season, where the entire court would gather to pull for celestial blessings. It was the perfect opportunity. He could stage another accident, something more spectacular than the toppled incense brazier. Something that would contaminate not just his own pull, but dozens, perhaps hundreds of others. The pity counter would skyrocket. But first, he needed to get out of this hidden chamber and back to his quarters without being seen. And he needed to deal with the blood staining his robes. He was still formulating a plan when a soft chime echoed in his mind, a familiar, unwelcome sensation. The psychic link with Emperor Xian was activating, but not by his choice. Through the connection, he felt a tug, an insistent summons. Ling Wei froze, his bandaging forgotten. This wasn't right. He always initiated the connection. The Emperor was supposed to be passive, unaware of the strings that guided him. But now the pull came from the other direction. He closed his eyes, focusing on the link. Through it, he caught fragments of thought, emotion, sensation that weren't his own, the smooth texture of jade worry beads being turned over in nervous fingers, the faint scent of sandalwood incense, the weight of imperial robes that felt too heavy for slender shoulders. And a thought, clear and distinct, that echoed with the Emperor's mental voice: why do I keep thinking about that eunuch? The quiet one with the tired eyes. Ling Wei. His name keeps appearing. Like a whisper I didn't ask for. Alarm shot through Ling Wei, cold and sharp. The psychic link was supposed to be undetectable. The system description for Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+, had been clear, permanent, undetectable psychic link. But now Emperor Xian was noticing. Not the suggestions themselves, those were subtle enough to blend with natural thought, but the connection's presence. The constant, low-level hum of another consciousness brushing against his own. Was it weakening? Or had the celestial probe from the archives done something to it? Or perhaps the Emperor's own celestial heritage, diluted though it might be after generations, was making him sensitive to such manipulations. The summons grew stronger. Not a verbal command, but a psychic pull, drawing Ling Wei toward the imperial quarters. Emperor Xian wanted to see him. Personally. Now. Ling Wei looked down at his blood-stained robes, at the makeshift bandage visible through the torn fabric. He couldn't appear like this. Questions would be asked. Suspicion would bloom. But the summons was insistent, a psychic hook lodged in his mind that he couldn't ignore without severing the connection entirely, and that was unthinkable. Imperial Puppet Strings was his greatest asset, the foundation of everything he'd built. He took a deep breath, ignoring the pain in his side. He would have to risk it. Change robes somehow. Clean up. Appear as nothing more than a dutiful, slightly clumsy eunuch summoned by his emperor's passing whim. As he began moving toward the chamber's exit, a disguised door that led to a little-used storage room near the palace kitchens, the emperor's thoughts brushed against his mind again, clearer this time, tinged with a confusion that bordered on fear. Strange thoughts. Like echoes that aren't mine. Who is putting them there? The imperial audience hall stretched before Ling Wei like a gilded cage, its polished marble floors reflecting the morning light that filtered through intricately carved windows. The scent of sandalwood incense hung thick in the air, a ceremonial attempt to mask the tension that crackled between the kneeling eunuch and the young emperor seated upon the dragon throne. Ling Wei pressed his forehead to the cool stone, the wound in his side throbbing beneath his simple grey robes. He'd managed to change into a clean uniform before answering the summons, but the bloodstain on his previous garments still lay hidden in the forgotten records chamber, a silent witness to last night's violence. The psychic summons from Emperor Xian had been insistent, a persistent tug at the edges of his consciousness that felt different from the usual subtle suggestions he planted. More demanding. More aware. Rise, Eunuch Ling. The Emperor's voice echoed in the vast hall, younger than his 23 years should sound, yet carrying the weight of imperial authority. Ling Wei lifted his head but kept his gaze respectfully lowered, taking in the sight of Emperor Xian in his full ceremonial regalia. Gold-threaded dragons coiled across black silk, their embroidered eyes seeming to watch from every angle. The emperor's face was pale, his dark eyes shadowed with something that wasn't quite fatigue, more like suspicion trying to find form. "Your Majesty honors this humble servant with your attention," Ling Wei said, his voice carefully modulated to the perfect pitch of subservience. He remained kneeling, knowing the protocol demanded he wait for explicit permission to stand. "We have noticed coincidences." Emperor Xian leaned forward slightly, the movement causing the pearls on his crown to click softly. "The audit of Grand Chancellor Li's finances. The failed assassination attempt on Counselor Zhao last week that was thwarted by guards who just happened to be patrolling an unusual route. The sudden illness of Eunuch Zhang that prevented him from delivering a poisoned cup of tea to our chambers." Ling Wei's heart hammered against his ribs. Each incident he'd orchestrated through subtle psychic nudges, tiny adjustments to guard schedules, whispered suggestions about suspicious behavior, minor alterations to duty rosters. He'd been careful. Methodical. But apparently not careful enough. "Your Majesty's wisdom sees patterns where lesser men see only chaos," Ling Wei said, keeping his tone neutral. "But if this humble servant may speak freely." A flicker of the Emperor's hand granted permission. "The palace is a web of competing interests," Ling Wei continued, choosing his words with the precision of a master weaver selecting threads. "What appears as coincidence may simply be the natural consequence of loyal servants performing their duties with vigilance." The increased guard patrols were ordered after the incident with the toppled incense brazier during the monthly auspicious pull. The audit of Grand Chancellor Li's finances followed rumors of irregularities whispered in the servants' quarters. As for Eunuch Zhang's illness, he allowed a carefully calculated pause. The palace physicians confirmed it was a sudden fever. Though it is curious that he recovered so quickly after being removed from his duties near your Majesty's person. Emperor Xian's fingers tightened on the armrests of the dragon throne. "You suggest Eunuch Zhang was involved in the poisoning attempt?" "This humble servant suggests nothing, Your Majesty," Ling Wei said, bowing his head again. "Only that in a palace where power flows like water, sometimes the current carries unexpected debris to the surface." He could feel the Emperor's thoughts through the psychic link, a swirling mixture of paranoia, intelligence, and the lingering effects of Ling Wei's own subtle manipulations over the past months. The connection felt thinner than before. As if Emperor Xian's growing awareness was creating resistance, like trying to see through fog that thickened with each passing day. "We have heard whispers," the Emperor said slowly. "Whispers that certain eunuchs have been meeting in the dead of night. That gold changes hands in shadowed corridors. That there are those who believe our reign is unstable." Ling Wei's mind raced. This was the opening he needed, the perfect opportunity to redirect suspicion. For weeks, he'd been planting evidence against Eunuch Wang, one of Grand Chancellor Li's conspirators. A forged letter here. A lost ledger page there. Small pieces of a puzzle designed to be discovered at exactly this moment. "Your Majesty," Ling Wei said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried in the silent hall. "There is something this servant has hesitated to mention, for fear of appearing to slander a fellow eunuch of higher rank. But given Your Majesty's concerns." He reached into his sleeve and withdrew a small scroll case, one he prepared after escaping the assassins, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. The case was plain bamboo, unmarked, exactly the kind used by palace functionaries for unofficial communications. 3 nights ago, while performing my duties inspecting the courtyard stones before the grand ritual, I found this hidden beneath a loose paving stone near the moon viewing pavilion," Ling Wei said, placing the case on the floor before him and pushing it forward with both hands. "I intended to deliver it to the Imperial investigators, but, given recent events, I feared it might disappear into the wrong hands." Emperor Xian gestured to a guard, who retrieved the case and brought it to the throne. The Emperor unrolled the single sheet of rice paper inside, his eyes scanning the characters. Ling Wei knew what they said, a carefully forged message from Eunuch Wang to an unnamed conspirator, discussing the removal of obstacles before the grand ritual and mentioning a payment of 500 gold taels to be delivered to a certain merchant in the capital's western district. The forgery wasn't perfect. A true investigator might notice the brush strokes didn't quite match Eunuch Wang's known handwriting samples. But it didn't need to be perfect, it only needed to be plausible enough to create doubt, to redirect the Emperor's suspicion from psychic manipulation to mundane conspiracy. "This mentions no names," Emperor Xian said, though his voice had gone cold. "No, Your Majesty," Ling Wei agreed. "But the merchant mentioned, Master Feng of the Western markets, is known to have supplied rare herbs to Eunuch Wang's personal physician. And the location where I found the message, the moon viewing pavilion, has been the site of several unauthorized meetings reported by night patrols. He let the implications hang in the incense-heavy air. The beauty of the frame job was its simplicity, just enough connection to seem credible, not enough to be easily disproven without a full investigation. And by the time that investigation ran its course, Ling Wei would have accumulated enough pity for Heaven's Mandate Edit, SSS, to make the entire matter irrelevant. Emperor Xian rolled the scroll back up, his movements deliberate. "You will say nothing of this to anyone," he commanded. "We will have the Imperial investigators look into Master Fang's transactions. And Eunuch Wang will be observed." "As your Majesty commands," Ling Wei said, bowing until his forehead touched the floor again. The pain in his side flared with the movement, a sharp reminder of his vulnerability. "You may go," the Emperor said, but as Ling Wei began to rise, Emperor Xian added, "One more thing, Eunuch Ling." Ling Wei froze, halfway between kneeling and standing. "These strange thoughts that have been plaguing us," the Emperor said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried through the silent hall. "These, impressions that feel like memories we don't remember making. Suggestions that appear fully formed in our mind. Have you experienced anything similar?" The question hung between them, sharp as a drawn blade. Ling Wei felt the psychic link tremble, not with his own fear, but with the Emperor's dawning comprehension. The young ruler was putting pieces together, following the trail of psychic breadcrumbs back to their source. "This humble servant's mind is too simple for such complexities," Ling Wei said, keeping his voice carefully empty of any emotion beyond respectful confusion. "Perhaps it is the strain of ruling, Your Majesty. The weight of the empire pressing upon a single mind. Even dragons must rest their wings sometimes." For a long moment, Emperor Xian said nothing. Then he waved a dismissive hand. "Go. And tend to that injury you're trying to hide. We're not blind, Eunuch Ling." Ling Wei bowed deeply and retreated from the hall, his steps measured despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. The Emperor knew about the wound. Had he noticed the slight stiffness in Ling Wei's movements? The careful way he'd risen? Or was there another source of information, spies within the palace reporting back to the throne? He didn't allow himself to think about it until he was safely in the labyrinth of servant corridors behind the main palace complex. There, in a storage alcove filled with cleaning supplies and discarded furniture, Ling Wei leaned against a wall and let out a slow, controlled breath. The audience had gone better than he'd feared, worse than he'd hoped. He'd successfully redirected suspicion toward Eunuch Wang, buying time. But Emperor Xian's questions about the psychic link, that was dangerous. The connection was becoming detectable, like a seam in fabric that frayed with use. He needed to strengthen it. Or better yet, acquire a drop that would reinforce it, make it undetectable again. But that would require pity accumulation, and right now, he was still recovering from the fatigue of using eavesdropper's echo, a. Ling Wei closed his eyes and reached into the mental space where his Gacha system resided, a void filled with swirling celestial energy that only he could perceive. His pity counter glowed softly in his mind's eye, 10,201. Only one increment since the monthly auspicious pull, earned through the minor failures of daily life, a broken inkstone, a spilled tray of tea, small misfortunes he engineered without drawing attention. He needed more. Much more. Pulling a small, unmarked Gacha token from his sleeve, one of hundreds circulating in the palace, indistinguishable from any other, Ling Wei focused his will. The token was plain bronze, stamped with the celestial character for fortune that seemed to mock him with every failure. He didn't need it to perform a pull, any focused intent toward the celestial energies could trigger the system. But the token helped concentrate his mind, provided a physical anchor for the metaphysical act. In the storage alcove's dim light, Ling Wei visualized the pull. Not as a hopeful reach for power, but as a deliberate, calculated failure. He imagined the celestial energies flowing through him, gathering into the familiar pattern of a Gacha activation, then deliberately introducing a flaw, a misaligned character, a reversed flow, a subtle corruption in the energy matrix. The air around him grew cold. The scent of ozone mixed with the dust of the alcove. A faint, silvery light began to glow around the token in his hand, then flickered, sputtered, and died. Pull failed, pity +1. The message appeared in his mind, accompanied by the now familiar hollow sensation of wasted potential. His pity counter ticked up to 10,202. Another drop in an ocean of need. At this rate, reaching the 50,000 pity required for Heaven's Mandate Edit, SSS, would take years of minor, unnoticed failures. He needed a major ritual. A public failure on a grand scale. The upcoming grand ritual would serve, but that was still weeks away, and Emperor Xian's growing awareness of the psychic link created a deadline he couldn't ignore. As Ling Wei tucked the token back into his sleeve, a sudden ripple passed through the psychic connection, not from Emperor Xian this time, but from somewhere else. A presence vast and ancient, brushing against the edges of his consciousness with the casual indifference of a giant stepping over an anthill. He staggered, catching himself against a shelf of cleaning rags. The presence was gone as quickly as it had come, but the afterimage lingered, a sense of celestial power so immense it made the Gacha system seem like a child's toy in comparison. Then the palace bells began to ring. Not the usual hourly chimes, but the deep, resonant tones reserved for major announcements. Once. Twice. Thrice. A pattern Ling Wei recognized from his days as Shadow Chancellor, the arrival of an honored guest of celestial rank. He emerged from the servant corridors into a side courtyard just as the main gates of the palace swung open. Courtiers and officials streamed toward the main audience hall, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Ling Wei fell into step with a group of lower-ranking eunuchs, keeping his head down but his senses sharp. "What's happening?" one eunuch whispered to another. "Celestial envoy," came the hushed reply. "Unexpected arrival. They say he brings word from the Jade Court itself." The word sent a chill down Ling Wei's spine. The Jade Court, the mythical seat of the celestial beings who governed the Gacha system. Their envoys rarely visited the mortal realm, and never without reason. He reached the edges of the crowd gathering in the main courtyard just as the envoy made his entrance. The celestial being moved with unnatural grace, his feet not quite touching the ground. He wore robes of shifting colors that seemed to drink the sunlight and give it back as prismatic rainbows. His face was beautiful in the way a frozen waterfall is beautiful, perfect, crystalline, and utterly devoid of warmth. Two lesser attendants floated behind him, their forms blurred at the edges as if not fully present in this reality. Emperor Xian had emerged from the audience hall to meet the envoy personally, a breach of protocol that spoke volumes about the visitor's importance. The young emperor knelt, the dragon throne bowing to celestial authority. "Rise, son of heaven," the envoy said, his voice like wind chimes made of glass. "We bring tidings from the Jade Court. A grand celestial Gacha ceremony has been decreed. To be held in 3 days' time, at the height of the lunar alignment." A murmur swept through the crowd. 3 days. Grand ceremonies usually required months of preparation. The ceremony will determine the Empire's fate for the next celestial cycle, the envoy continued, his eyes scanning the crowd with detached interest. "All factions shall participate. All grievances shall be settled through the will of the Gacha. And the Emperor." His gaze settled on Emperor Xian. "The Emperor shall perform the central pull himself. His success or failure will seal the dynasty's fortune." Ling Wei's blood ran cold. He could feel it through the psychic link, the sudden spike of fear in Emperor Xian's mind, quickly suppressed beneath imperial calm. But more than that, he could feel something else, a subtle, almost imperceptible thread of celestial energy connecting the envoy to Emperor Xian. Not a psychic link like his own, but something older, more fundamental. A connection that had always been there, sleeping, and was now being awakened. And as the envoy's eyes continued their slow sweep of the courtyard, they passed over Ling Wei. For the briefest moment, they paused. Not with recognition, but with interest. As a scholar might note an unusual insect before moving on. The message was clear, though unspoken, this ceremony wasn't just about determining the Empire's fate. It was a trap. A beautifully orchestrated, publicly mandated trap designed to force Emperor Xian into a Gacha pull that would either cement his rule or destroy it. And somehow, Ling Wei knew with bone-deep certainty, his own presence, his pity accumulation, his psychic link, was part of the calculation. The celestial envoys weren't just watching anymore. They were making their move. And they were using the very system Ling Wei had learned to manipulate as the weapon to do it. The Imperial Palace's central courtyard had been transformed into a theater of celestial ambition. Marble platforms rose in concentric circles, each inlaid with silver filigree that traced constellations long faded from mortal memory. At the heart stood the Grand Gacha altar, a monolith of polished obsidian veined with luminescent blue energy that pulsed like a slow, deep heartbeat. Ling Wei moved through the preparations with the practiced invisibility of a lifelong shadow, his eunuch's robes of plain gray wool brushing against stones still damp from the morning's ceremonial cleansing. His side ached where the assassin's blade had grazed him 2 days prior. The wound was shallow, bound tightly beneath his robes, but each breath carried the faint sting of torn flesh, a constant reminder of how close he had come to bleeding out in that deserted corridor. He kept his head bowed, his eyes scanning the courtyard from beneath lowered lids. Servants scurried like ants, hauling silk banners embroidered with celestial sigils. Priests in white and gold chanted over gacha orbs, crystal spheres that glowed with trapped starlight, arranged in precise geometric patterns around the altar. Grand Chancellor Li stood near the eastern platform, his vermilion robes a splash of blood against the monochrome grandeur. He was speaking in low tones to the celestial envoy, a being whose form seemed to waver at the edges, as if not fully anchored to this reality. The envoy's face was a mask of serene detachment, but his hands moved with deliberate precision as he adjusted the placement of a particularly large gacha orb at the altar's summit. Ling Wei watched, his pulse quickening. The orb's inner light shifted from blue to a faint, sickly green as the envoy's fingers brushed its surface. A subtle change, one that would go unnoticed by anyone not looking for treachery. Ling Wei's mind raced. He had seen such manipulations before, in the hidden archives of the Shadow Chancellery. Gacha orbs could be primed to yield specific outcomes, a forbidden art that required both celestial authority and a profound understanding of the system's underlying mechanics. The green tint meant the orb had been attuned to a catastrophic failure outcome, one that would drain the puller's luck and channel it elsewhere. To the Dynasty Reset project, perhaps. Emperor Xian, as the central puller, would be left spiritually crippled, his mandate shattered before the entire court. He needed to get closer. Ling Wei slipped between two groups of chanting priests, his movements fluid and silent. The air hummed with gathered energy, the collective anticipation of hundreds of courtiers, the whispered prayers of priests, the latent power of thousands of gacha orbs waiting to be unleashed. It was a symphony of potential, and Ling Wei felt the weight of his own cursed luck like a stone in his gut. 10,000 failures. 10,000 pieces of trash. And now, the pity they had bought him was the only thing standing between the empire and collapse. He reached the inner circle, close enough to hear the faint sizzle of energy from the altar. The celestial envoy was speaking now, his voice a melody that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the mind. The alignment is perfect, Chancellor. The celestial currents favor a transformative outcome. Li's smile was thin, predatory. And the Emperor's role? As planned. His pull will be the catalyst. The energy released will be substantial. Ling Wei's fingers tightened around the hem of his robe. Catalyst. Not a beneficiary, but a catalyst, a sacrifice to power some greater design. He glanced toward the northern pavilion, where Emperor Xian sat on a temporary throne, surrounded by his personal guard. The young ruler looked pale, his eyes fixed on the altar with a mixture of awe and dread. Through the psychic link, Ling Wei felt the Emperor's anxiety like a cold thread winding through his own consciousness. Xian was afraid. Not of failure, but of the ceremony itself, of the way the envoy's gaze seemed to strip him bare, weighing his soul against some unseen measure. Good. Fear could be shaped. Ling Wei closed his eyes, reaching for the psychic connection. The Imperial Puppet Strings hummed to life, a network of invisible filaments stretching from his mind to the Emperor's. He had used it sparingly since the summoning, planting suggestions, guiding decisions, but each use carried a cost. A strain that left his temples throbbing and his thoughts frayed. Now, he pushed deeper, past the surface thoughts, into the quiet undercurrent of Xian's mind. He did not insert a command. Commands could be resisted, questioned. Instead, he planted a seed, a single, persistent doubt. He wrapped it in the Emperor's own memories, the envoy's too perfect smile, the way his attendants never blinked, the faint scent of ozone that clung to them like a burial shroud. He let the doubt take root, feeding it with Xian's innate suspicion of celestial overreach. The thought crystallized slowly, organically, this envoy does not serve the empire. He serves something else. The ceremony is not a blessing, it is a test of your gullibility. Ling Wei opened his eyes. The world swam for a moment, the courtyard tilting on its axis. A sharp pain lanced through his skull, followed by a warm trickle of blood from his left nostril. He wiped it away hastily, his fingers coming away stained red. The strain was worse than before, the link felt brittle, as if too much pressure would snap it entirely. He could feel Xian's consciousness pushing back, not against the doubt, but against the foreign presence in his mind. The Emperor was becoming aware of the strings. Not enough to identify them, but enough to sense their pull. In the pavilion, Xian shifted on his throne. He leaned toward his chief guard, whispering something too low for others to hear. The guard's expression tightened, then he bowed and approached the altar. The chanting faltered as he raised his voice. His Imperial Majesty requests a delay. The celestial omens have shifted, he senses disharmony in the alignment. The ceremony must be postponed until tomorrow, to allow for recalibration. A ripple of confusion swept through the courtyard. Priests exchanged uncertain glances. Grand Chancellor Li's face darkened, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second before he smoothed it into diplomatic concern. Your Majesty, the celestial timing is precise, and my mandate is imperial, Xian interrupted, his voice stronger than Ling Wei had heard in weeks. We delay. The envoy's serene mask did not slip, but his eyes, those depthless, star-filled eyes, flickered toward the crowd, scanning, searching. For a moment, his gaze passed over Ling Wei. It felt like being doused in ice water. Ling Wei held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. Did the envoy sense the psychic interference? Or was he merely looking for the source of the Emperor's sudden defiance? The moment passed. The envoy bowed, a motion so fluid it seemed unnatural. As your Majesty wills. The heavens are patient. But the words carried a subtle edge, a promise of consequences deferred, not abandoned. The courtyard began to dissolve into controlled chaos as preparations were halted. Ling Wei melted back into the shadows, his mind already turning to the next problem. He had bought a day. One day to uncover the full extent of the trap. He waited until dusk, when the palace settled into the uneasy quiet of postponed ceremony. Using his espionage training, he avoided the main corridors, slipping through servant passages and forgotten hallways. His destination was the old records wing, a part of the palace so neglected that dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed for years. But Ling Wei remembered. As Shadow Chancellor, he had studied maps of the palace's hidden spaces, including rumors of a sealed chamber beneath the records hall. He found the entrance behind a collapsed bookshelf, its wood rotten with age. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the air growing cold and damp as he went deeper. The walls here were not marble, but rough-hewn stone, etched with carvings so ancient the language was unrecognizable. At the bottom, a heavy door of black iron barred his way. It was locked, but the mechanism was simple, a relic from an era before celestial gachas. A few minutes of careful probing with a lockpick from his hidden kit, and the door swung inward with a groan that echoed in the silence beyond. The chamber was small, circular, and utterly devoid of light until Ling Wei struck a match from his pouch. The flame revealed walls lined with stone tablets and scrolls of brittle parchment, all covered in the same archaic script. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it rested a single, open tome. The pages were made of some material that shimmered like mother of pearl, and the writing upon them glowed with a soft, silver light. Ling Wei approached, his breath fogging in the cold air. He traced the characters with a finger, his Shadow Chancellor's training allowing him to decipher fragments of the lost tongue. The celestial architects, he whispered. They did not create the Gacha system to empower humanity. They created it to farm us. The text described a cycle, mortals performed pulls, expending their innate luck. Failures generated pity energy, which was harvested by the celestial beings through mechanisms like the Dynasty Reset Project. Successful pulls, meanwhile, were carefully rationed, just enough to keep hope alive, to keep the pulls coming. The system was a feeding trough, and humanity was the livestock. He read further, his blood turning to ice. The Grand Celestial Gacha ceremony was not merely a trap for Emperor Xian, it was a harvesting event on a massive scale. The primed orb would drain not just the Emperor's luck, but the collective luck of every noble and official present, funneling it upward to empower the celestial envoy's true masters. The transformative outcome Li and the envoy had discussed was the Empire's spiritual evisceration. Ling Wei's hands trembled as he closed the tome. The glow faded, plunging the chamber back into near darkness. He had uncovered the truth, but it was a truth that offered no immediate solace. The celestial beings were not manipulators, they were predators. And tomorrow, they intended to feast. As he turned to leave, his foot dislodged a loose stone. Beneath it, something glinted, a small, metallic disc, etched with a symbol he recognized from the tome, the mark of the celestial architects. He picked it up, and the moment his fingers touched it, a jolt of energy shot up his arm. Visions flashed before his eyes, a sprawling celestial city built from solidified luck, faceless beings watching mortal worlds through Gacha orbs like windows, and a single, towering figure whose form was woven from stolen destinies. Then, as suddenly as it came, the vision vanished, leaving only the cold disk in his palm and a profound, chilling certainty, the celestial envoys knew he was here. They had always known. The match burned out, dropping the chamber into absolute blackness. Ling Wei stood frozen, the weight of ancient secrets pressing down on him. Above, in the palace, the delayed ceremony loomed. Below, in the darkness, the truth waited, and it was hungry. The forgotten records chamber smelled of dust and decayed parchment, a scent that clung to Ling Wei's robes as he knelt on the cold stone floor. Moonlight filtered through a single high window, casting silver bars across the scattered scrolls and the metallic disc he discovered the previous night. His side still ached where the assassin's blade had grazed him, a shallow cut now bound with strips torn from his own undergarments, but the pain was a constant reminder of his vulnerability. He placed his hands on the floor, palms flat against the stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Before him lay 3 small gacha orbs, each no larger than a quail's egg, their surfaces etched with celestial symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. These were low-tier training orbs, pilfered from the palace's storage rooms years ago when he'd first established his hidden network. Worthless for actual power, but perfect for what he needed tonight. 10,203, Ling Wei whispered to himself, the number etched into his mind like a prayer. His pity counter, the system's merciless tally of every failure, crept closer to the threshold he'd calculated for, Heaven's Mandate Edit, SSS. The Grand Celestial Gacha ceremony loomed in 2 days, and Emperor Xian would be walking into a trap designed to drain his luck and leave him vulnerable to Grand Chancellor Li's coup. Ling Wei needed that edit ability to alter whatever decree emerged from the ceremony, to twist fate itself in the Emperor's favor. He took the first orb between his fingers, feeling its cool, glassy surface. The ritual was simple: channel a fragment of will into the orb, speak the incantation, and watch as celestial energy either coalesced into something useful or dissipated into nothing. For Ling Wei, it was always nothing. By the celestial architect's design, he murmured, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. The orb shimmered, its internal light swirling like trapped starlight. For a moment, hope, that ancient, foolish reflex, flared in his chest. Then the light died, collapsing inward until the orb was just a dull piece of glass. Another failure. He didn't pause. He picked up the second orb, repeating the incantation. Failure. The third orb. Failure. He reached into a hidden pouch at his belt, producing 3 more orbs he'd secreted away. Failure. 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 The hours bled together, marked only by the slow crawl of moonlight across the floor. Ling Wei's hands grew stiff with cold, his knees aching from kneeling on stone. Each failure was a tiny death, a reminder of the curse that had defined his life. While courtiers flaunted S-rank pulls that summoned flaming swords or armor that could turn aside arrows, Ling Wei got broken trinkets and useless baubles. The eavesdropper's echo, had been his rarest success before the pity system triggered, and even that came at the cost of crushing fatigue after prolonged use. But tonight, each failure was a victory. His pity counter climbed, 10,204, 10,205, 10,206. He visualized it as a reservoir filling drop by drop, each failed orb adding to the pressure that would eventually force the system to grant him something worthwhile. The celestial architects who designed this system thought they were harvesting human luck, turning ambition into fuel for their own purposes. They hadn't accounted for someone who could weaponize despair. Around the 100th failure, a headache began to pulse behind his eyes. Using Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+, to plant distrust in Emperor Xian's mind yesterday had strained the psychic link, leaving him with phantom pains that came and went like distant thunder. He could feel the connection now, a faint thread of awareness that led to the Emperor's chambers, where Xian slept fitfully, troubled by dreams Ling Wei had carefully cultivated. The young ruler was beginning to question, to doubt. That was good. But the strain on the link was dangerous. If it broke, or if Xian became fully aware of it. Ling Wei pushed the thought aside. He reached for another orb. Failure. Dawn was still hours away when he reached 10,298. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the next orb. The air in the chamber felt charged, thick with the accumulated energy of hundreds of failed pulls. Dust motes danced in the moonlight like celestial spirits watching his futility. This time, something different happened. As the orb's light died, a notification flashed in his mind, not the usual empty silence, but a crisp, crystalline chime that echoed in his consciousness. Words formed behind his eyes, glowing with soft blue light. Pity threshold reached, minor compensation granted. Shadow step, B, activated. Duration, 1 hour. Cost, temporary loss of peripheral vision. Ling Wei's breath caught. A B rank drop. Trivial by court standards, where even mid-ranking officials boasted A rank or higher. But for him, after thousands of failures, it felt like a revelation. The ability settled into his mind like a new limb, an instinctual understanding of how to move without sound, how to blend with shadows so completely that even attentive eyes might slide right over him. But the cost? Temporary loss of peripheral vision. He tested it, turning his head slowly. To the sides, his vision ended abruptly, as if looking through a tunnel. He could see only what was directly before him. Dangerous, especially in the palace's maze-like corridors. But he had an hour. And he knew exactly how to use it. Grand Chancellor Li's quarters were in the western wing of the palace, a sprawling complex of rooms that reflected the man's ambition. Ling Wei had memorized the layout years ago, back when he'd been Shadow Chancellor and Li was just another rising official. The man had always been careful, surrounding himself with guards and celestial artifacts. But tonight, Ling Wei needed one particular artifact, the celestial orb Li and the envoy had been manipulating yesterday, the one designed to ensure Emperor Xian's failure at the ceremony. He slipped from the records chamber, shadow step, B, already engaged. His footsteps made no sound, not even a whisper against the stone. The palace at night was a different creature, empty corridors lit by occasional spirit lamps, the distant sounds of guards changing shifts, the sigh of wind through high windows. Ling Wei moved like a ghost, staying close to walls where shadows pooled thickest. His tunnel vision forced him to move slowly, turning his head constantly to scan ahead. Every corner became a potential ambush. Every doorway a threat. He passed a pair of eunuchs carrying night lanterns, their faces pale in the yellow light. They walked within 3 feet of him, chatting quietly about some court gossip, and didn't so much as glance in his direction. Shadow step, worked. Li's quarters were guarded, of course. 2 men in the Chancellor's personal livery stood outside the main door, their postures alert. Ling Wei watched from a shadowed alcove across the corridor. These weren't ordinary guards, they moved with the precise, economical grace of men enhanced by Gacha drops. One kept glancing at a small compass-like device in his palm, its needle spinning slowly. A tracking artifact, probably keyed to celestial energy signatures. Ling Wei waited. Patience was a weapon he'd honed over years of hiding in plain sight. After 20 minutes, one guard muttered something to the other and walked down the corridor toward the latrines. The remaining guard leaned against the wall, his attention momentarily diverted. This was the moment. Ling Wei moved, flowing across the corridor like smoke. Shadow step, muffled his passage completely. He reached the door, a heavy thing of dark wood reinforced with celestial bronze, and produced a set of lockpicks from his sleeve. His espionage training took over, fingers working by feel alone. The lock clicked open with a softness that even the guard 3 feet away didn't hear. Inside, Li's quarters were opulent but orderly. Scrolls filled shelves along one wall, each neatly labeled. A large desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single object, the celestial orb. It was larger than the training orbs Ling Wei had been using, about the size of a clenched fist. Its surface swirled with captured starlight, and within that light, Ling Wei could see the malicious programming Li and the envoy had implanted, a complex web of celestial script designed to intercept Emperor Xian's pull during the ceremony and twist it into a catastrophic failure. The orb pulsed slowly, like a sleeping heart. Ling Wei approached the desk. His tunnel vision made the room feel smaller, the orb the only thing that existed. He reached for it. And froze. A subtle click echoed in the silence. A pressure plate beneath the rug. He'd missed it in his limited vision. No alarm sounded. No guards came rushing in. Instead, the orb's light brightened, and from its surface emerged a faint, whispering voice, a recording enchantment, triggered by the pressure plate. Interesting, the voice said. It was Grand Chancellor Li's voice, smooth and cultured. I wondered who might be bold enough to steal from me. The Emperor's new favorite eunuch, perhaps. Or one of the celestial envoy's pets. No matter. The orb is bait. And you have taken it. The voice faded. The orb's light stabilized. Ling Wei's mind raced. Bait. Which meant Li expected this theft. Which meant the orb was probably trapped or marked. But he needed it, needed to study its programming, to understand exactly how the trap at the ceremony would spring. He made a decision. Swiftly, he wrapped the orb in a piece of dark silk from his sleeve, insulating it from direct contact. Then he turned and slipped back out the door, relocking it behind him. The guard was still there, now pacing slowly. Ling Wei waited until the man's back was turned, then ghosted away down the corridor. He was halfway back to the records chamber when, Shadow Step, expired. The ability didn't fade gradually, it snapped off like a cut string. One moment he was moving in perfect silence, the next his footsteps echoed faintly against stone. His peripheral vision returned in a dizzying rush, the world expanding suddenly to include the edges he'd been missing. The transition left him disoriented, stumbling slightly against a wall. That was when they emerged from the shadows. For men, not in palace guard uniforms but in dark, close-fitting garments that allowed for easy movement. They surrounded him in the narrow corridor, two ahead, two behind. Their faces were covered by cloth masks, but their eyes held the flat, professional focus of seasoned hunters. And in their hands, they held not swords, but strange devices, small metallic constructs that hummed with celestial energy. Ling Wei recognized the devices from his studies, Gacha enhanced trackers, keyed to specific energy signatures. They must have been waiting for, Shadow Step, to end, for his own celestial signature to become visible again. Li's personal guards, just as the chapter outline had warned. The lead guard raised his tracker. The device's needle spun wildly before pointing directly at Ling Wei. The Chancellor wants to know who's been poking around his business, the man said, his voice muffled by the mask. You can come quietly, or we can drag what's left of you. Ling Wei's hand went to his side, where the wound from the previous assassination attempt still throbbed. He had no combat drops. No weapons except his espionage training and the stolen orb wrapped in silk. The corridor was too narrow for clever footwork, the guards too well positioned. He calculated odds, escape routes, possibilities. And found them all wanting. The guards advanced, their trackers humming louder. The corridor's narrow walls seemed to press in, the flickering oil lamps casting long, dancing shadows that made the four guards appear larger, more monstrous. Ling Wei's breath came in sharp, controlled gasps, the metallic tang of blood still fresh in his mouth from the psychic strain of the previous day. The stolen celestial orb, cool and unnaturally light, was a leaden weight in the inner pocket of his eunuch's robe. The four guards, clad in the dark leathers of Grand Chancellor Li's personal retinue, fanned out with practiced precision. Their eyes, hard and devoid of mercy, were fixed on him. One held a Gacha-enhanced tracking device, a small, pulsating crystal orb that emitted a faint, sickly green light, synchronizing with the stolen orb's energy signature. Come quietly, Eunuch, the lead guard growled, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the stone. The Chancellor wishes words. Ling Wei's mind raced, calculating distances, angles, the fading adrenaline from the expired, Shadow Step, his peripheral vision was still a blurred, indistinct haze, a temporary cost of the ability. He could not fight them directly, not 4 against 1, not with their enhanced gear. But the archives were his domain, a maze he had memorized during countless nights of research. He took a half-step back, feigning fear, letting his shoulders slump in the submissive posture expected of a lowly eunuch. Please, honored guards, he whispered, voice trembling with an artful blend of terror and deference. I was merely, lost. As he spoke, he pivoted on his heel and bolted. The movement was sudden, a burst of speed that belied his unassuming appearance. He darted not toward the main thoroughfare, but into a side passage lined with towering shelves of ancient scrolls and codices. The guards cursed, their boots pounding the flagstones in pursuit. The green light of the tracker pulsed brighter, a beacon in the dimness. Ling Wei weaved through the labyrinth, his feet silent on the worn stone. He knew this route, past the treatise on celestial alignments, left at the crumbling statue of a forgotten astrologer, down the narrow stairwell where the air grew cold and damp. His thoughts were a torrent. The orb. It was bait, Li had said. A trap within a trap. But why leave it for him to steal? To track him? To test his capabilities? The questions gnawed at him, but survival came first. He could feel the guards closing, their breaths now audible, their shadows merging with his own in the lamplight. He needed to lose the tracker. He needed space. He burst into a wider chamber, the Hall of Forgotten Decrees. Here, dust lay thick on scroll racks, and the air smelled of old parchment and decay. In the center stood a large, circular dais used centuries ago for sealing imperial edicts. Ling Wei's eyes darted to the western archway. Beyond it lay the trapped section, a part of the archive sealed off after a collapse decades prior. Rumor said it was unstable, haunted by the echoes of scribes who had died there. More importantly, it was a maze of dead ends and pressure-sensitive floor tiles that triggered hidden mechanisms. He skidded to a halt near the dais, pretending to stumble. The guards entered the hall, spreading out to cut off his exits. The lead guard raised the tracking device, its light now cast a sharp, accusing beam directly at Ling Wei's chest. Enough running, the guard snarled. The orb. Hand it over. Ling Wei raised his hands in surrender, his mind reaching out through the invisible tether of Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+. The connection to Emperor Xian was a constant, low hum in his consciousness, but now he focused it, not on the Emperor, but on the guards. He could not control them directly, the strings were bound solely to Xian, but he could project, suggest, manipulate perception. He poured his will into the link, visualizing not the dusty hall, but the grand inspection corridor of the inner palace, where the fearsome imperial inspectors, clad in vermilion robes and wielding authority to arrest even nobles, conducted their rounds. He let the suggestion flow, weaving it with the guard's own latent fears. The air in the hall seemed to shimmer. The lead guard blinked, his eyes widening. Where Ling Wei stood, he now saw the stern, imposing figure of Chief Inspector Gao, a man known for his ruthlessness. The other guards stiffened, their weapons lowering slightly as they saw not a eunuch, but a squad of inspectors emerging from the shadows, their faces obscured by official masks. "You are out of bounds," Ling Wei whispered through the psychic link, his voice echoing in their minds as Inspector Gao's. "This area is under imperial quarantine. Explain your presence." The lead guard paled. "We were pursuing a thief, honored inspector." "Thief?" the hallucinated Gao boomed. "We see no thief. We see guards trespassing in a restricted archive. This is a violation of Edict 7. You will come with us for questioning." The suggestion took root, fueled by the guards' ingrained fear of the inspectorate. They glanced at each other, uncertainty eroding their aggression. The tracker's beam wavered. Ling Wei pressed harder, adding details, the scent of sandalwood incense that inspectors used, the faint rustle of silk robes. One guard took a step back, his hand falling from his sword hilt. "Our apologies, Inspector," the lead guard stammered, bowing hastily. "We must have been misled." With that, they turned and fled, their retreat hurried, almost panicked. The green light of the tracker vanished around the corner, its pulse fading. Ling Wei released the psychic projection, sagging against the dais as a fresh wave of pain lanced through his temples. Blood trickled from his nose again, warm and salty. Using the strings for such detailed, multi-target manipulation was a brutal strain, far beyond simple suggestions to the Emperor. He wiped the blood away with his sleeve, his breath coming in ragged pulls. Silence descended, broken only by the distant drip of water. He was alone. For now. He stumbled to a nearby reading desk, its surface gray with dust, and collapsed into the chair. With trembling hands, he withdrew the stolen celestial orb. It was the size of a goose egg, crafted from a material that was neither metal nor glass, but something in between, opalescent, with faint, swirling patterns of gold and azure deep within its core. It felt alive, humming with a low, celestial energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Holding it up to the dim light of a lone candle he lit from his tinderbox, he focused his ancient text interpretation skill. The patterns were not random, they were a language, a celestial script used by the architects of the Gacha system. His eyes traced the flowing lines, his mind deciphering the intent woven into the orb's very structure. It was a focus, a conduit. Its purpose was not to store power, but to redirect it. To subtly influence the outcome of a Gacha pull by bending the streams of fate or luck that the system harvested. Specifically, this orb had been calibrated. He could see the settings, like tiny, ethereal dials, tuned to ensure a catastrophic failure when used by a specific individual, Emperor Xian. It would not just yield a trash pull, it would actively drain the Emperor's residual luck, leaving him vulnerable, his mandate weakened. It was a weapon disguised as ritual paraphernalia. Ling Wei's lips curled in a cold smile. So this was the trap. Li and the envoy had not just rigged the ceremony, they had crafted a tool to cripple the Emperor spiritually, making him an easy puppet for their subsequent takeover. He studied it further, noting a secondary function. The orb also acted as a beacon, its energy signature unique and traceable. That explained the tracker. Li had wanted him to steal it, to lead the guards to him, or perhaps to something else. But why? To expose him? To test if he could be captured? The questions multiplied, but one thing was clear, he could not keep the orb on his person. Its energy was a lighthouse. He was about to consider hiding places when the air in the hall changed. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath forming plumes of mist. The candle flame guttered, not from draft, but as if something was sucking the warmth from the room. A sound began, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating in his bones. Ling Wei stiffened, his hand closing around the orb. He looked up. Across the chamber, near the archway leading to the trapped section, the shadows coalesced. They thickened, swirling like ink in water, pulling together into a humanoid form. It was tall, gaunt, clad in robes that seemed woven from starlight and void. No face was visible within its deep hood, only 2 points of cold, silver light where eyes should be. It held no weapon, but its presence was a physical weight, pressing down on Ling Wei's mind. He instinctively reached out with Imperial Puppet Strings, trying to probe, to suggest, to repel. His psychic touch met nothing. An absolute void. It was like trying to grasp smoke. The being did not react, did not even seem to notice the attempt. The silver points of light fixed on him, and he felt a cold, analytical gaze sweep over him, lingering on the orb in his hand. This was no guard, no human assassin. This was something sent by the celestial envoy. A spectral hunter. And as his psychic attack failed utterly, a chilling realization settled in his gut: this being was immune to psychic attacks. The one advantage he had relied on since his first pity drop was useless here. The spectral hunter took a silent step forward, its movement fluid, unnatural. The hum grew louder, now accompanied by a faint, crystalline chiming, like distant bells. It raised a hand, fingers elongated and translucent, pointing directly at Ling Wei, or more precisely, at the celestial orb. The message was clear: it had come for the orb, and for the thief who had taken it. Ling Wei's mind, usually a whirlwind of plans and contingencies, went momentarily still. The archives, his refuge, now felt like a cage. The hunter blocked the main exit. Behind him lay only the treacherous trapped section. His shadow step was spent, his psychic strings ineffective, his body aching from strain and blood loss. The orb hummed in his hand, a deadly prize. The spectral hunter advanced, soundless, inevitable, its silver eyes burning with celestial intent. The spectral hunter advanced, its form a shifting tapestry of moonlight and shadow that defied the laws of the garden. Ling Wei's back pressed against the cold marble of a moon-viewing pavilion, the stolen celestial orb clutched tight in his left hand. The hunter's footsteps made no sound on the dewy grass, but the air around it crackled with a faint, ozone-like energy that raised the hairs on Ling Wei's arms. He tried again, pushing through the lingering fatigue from his earlier psychic exertion. Focusing his will through the Imperial Puppet Strings, he sent a command: stop. Turn back. This place is forbidden. The psychic suggestion flowed outward like a ripple on still water, and dissolved against the hunter's form without effect. The being didn't even pause. Its faceless head tilted slightly, as if amused by the attempt. Ling Wei's mind raced. The records chamber's ancient texts had mentioned spectral hunters, enforcers sent by the celestial architects to eliminate anomalies in their system. Immune to psychic manipulation. Immune to conventional weapons. Designed to hunt those who discovered too much. The metallic disc he'd found bore their maker's symbol, and now one stood before him, its purpose clear in every silent step. The garden around them was a study in contrasts. Moonlight silvered the carefully raked gravel paths and glinted off the ornamental koi pond to their left. Cherry blossoms, out of season but kept blooming by some Gacha-enhanced horticultural pull, shed pale petals that drifted like snow. Yet where the hunter passed, the light seemed to dim, the colors leaching away to monochrome. Flowers wilted in its wake, their vitality siphoned away by whatever celestial mechanism powered its form. Ling Wei's fingers tightened around the orb. It hummed with a low, persistent vibration against his palm, warm where the night air was cool. His ancient text interpretation skill had revealed its purpose, a focus designed to channel and drain Emperor Xian's luck during the grand ceremony. But the texts had also hinted at secondary functions. Celestial artifacts often serve multiple purposes in their creator's intricate designs. The hunter was 10 paces away now. 8. Ling Wei could see the details of its form more clearly. It wasn't solid, not exactly. Its body seemed composed of layered shadows and faint starlight, with occasional glimpses of something like circuitry glowing beneath the surface. No eyes, no mouth, channeling his will not through the Imperial Puppet Strings this time, but through the orb itself. Ling Wei focused on the hunter's connection to the celestial realm. He imagined it as a thread, silver bright, stretching upward through layers of reality to whatever distant place the architects called home. And he poured his intent into the orb: disrupt. Sever. Isolate. The orb flared to life in his hand. Not with the brilliant light of a successful gacha pull, but with a sickly, pulsating glow that throbbed in time with his racing heartbeat. The vibration against his palm intensified until his teeth rattled with it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the hunter staggered. Its form flickered, the shadows that composed it bleeding into the moonlight and back again. The tendrils retracted, coiling back into hand shape. It made a sound, not through any mouth, but a vibration in the air itself, a low, discordant hum that set the cherry blossoms trembling on their branches. Ling Wei didn't wait. He scrambled backward, putting distance between them, his eyes never leaving the hunter. The orb's glow was fading already, the disruption temporary. He could feel the celestial connection reasserting itself, the thread reforming. He had seconds, maybe less. His mind touched the pity counter. 9,998, he needed 2 more failures to reach the threshold. 2 pulls he couldn't perform, not with the ritual preparations and focus required. Unless. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The grand ceremony's manipulated orb in his hand, designed to ensure catastrophic failure. Designed to drain luck. What if he used it on himself? It was madness. The orb was calibrated for Emperor Xian's unique celestial signature, not his own. Using it could backfire in ways the ancient texts hadn't recorded. It could drain his own luck permanently, whatever scraps of fortune he still possessed after 10,000 failed pulls. It could kill him outright. The hunter's form stabilized. It took a step forward. Then another. Ling Wei made his choice. He closed his eyes, shutting out the moonlit garden, the advancing hunter, everything. In his mind's eye, he visualized the gacha ritual, not the grand public spectacle, but the simple, personal version any citizen could perform. The focus of will, the reach into the celestial lottery, the pull. He'd done it 10,000 times. He knew the feeling intimately. And as he began the mental motions of a pull, he channeled the orb's energy into the process. Not to enhance it. To sabotage it. To ensure failure. The effect was immediate and violent. A pressure built behind his eyes, sharp and insistent. His connection to the pity counter, usually a passive awareness, flared with sudden, painful intensity. Numbers scrolled through his consciousness, 9,998. 9,999. The hunter was 3 paces away. Its hand rose again. Ling Wei forced a second pull. Same ritual. Same intentional failure. He poured everything into it, his frustration at a lifetime of cursed luck, his anger at the celestial architect's manipulation, his determination to protect the emperor he secretly controlled. The orb grew hot in his hand, almost burning. 10,000. The threshold shattered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world dissolved into light. Not the gentle moonlight of the garden, but a brilliant, overwhelming radiance that poured from somewhere above, bathing everything in stark white. Ling Wei's vision whited out. He felt weightless, untethered, as if his consciousness had been ripped from his body and flung upward. Through the glare, he perceived shapes, not physical forms, but concepts given visual representation. Scrolls of law. Decrees etched in golden light. The fabric of imperial authority woven into luminous threads. A voice spoke, not in words but in pure meaning that implanted itself directly into his mind, *Heaven's Mandate Edit, SSS. One minor imperial decree may be rewritten. Specify, *. The knowledge came with it, understanding of the drop's limitations. He couldn't alter fundamental laws. Couldn't rewrite history. Couldn't directly harm or help specific individuals beyond the decree's scope. But he could change one small piece of the empire's bureaucratic machinery. The hunter's tendrils were inches from his face. He could feel the chill of their non-existence against his skin. Ling Wei's thoughts crystallized. Not a decree about the ceremony. Not a direct attack on Li or the celestial envoy. Something simpler. Something that would summon help without revealing his hand. He focused his will, shaping the command, * rewrite the decree governing night patrol rotations in the Imperial Gardens. Allocate additional guards to the moon-viewing pavilion sector effective immediately, *. The light contracted, collapsing inward until it was a single point of brilliance hovering before him. Then it shot upward, vanishing into the night sky. For a moment, silence. Then footsteps. Dozens of them, approaching at a run from multiple directions. The clatter of armor. The rasp of swords being drawn from scabbards. Halt! Who goes there in the Imperial Gardens at this hour? The hunter froze. Its faceless head turned toward the sounds. The tendrils retracted. It seemed to consider for a moment, weighing its mission against the sudden arrival of Imperial guards. Ling Wei held his breath. The guards wouldn't be able to see the hunter, he realized. Celestial constructs existed on a different perceptual layer. But they would see him, standing alone in the garden with the stolen orb in hand. They would have questions. The hunter made its decision. Its form began to unravel, shadows dissipating like smoke in a breeze. The starlight circuitry beneath its surface dimmed, then winked out. It didn't vanish suddenly, but faded gradually, becoming transparent, then insubstantial, until only a faint afterimage remained, and then nothing at all. The last of its presence vanished just as the first guards rounded the corner of the pavilion. 6 Imperial guards in polished lamellar armor, their helmets bearing the phoenix crest of the Emperor's personal detail. They fanned out, weapons ready, eyes scanning the garden. Their leader, a man with a scar across his cheek that Ling Wei didn't recognize, frowned at the empty space where the hunter had stood, then focused on Ling Wei. Eunuch Ling. What are you doing out here? The gardens are closed after the second night bell. Ling Wei opened his mouth to respond. To fabricate some excuse about checking ceremony preparations, about being unable to sleep. But the words wouldn't come. The cost of the SSS drop hit him like a physical blow. It started as a headache, a sharp, stabbing pain behind his eyes that made him gasp. Then the fatigue, deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. It felt as if every ounce of mental energy had been ripped from him, leaving only hollow exhaustion. His legs buckled. The orb slipped from his nerveless fingers, thudding onto the grass without breaking. He tried to steady himself against the pavilion column, but his arms wouldn't obey. The world tilted. The guards' faces swam in his vision, their expressions shifting from suspicion to concern. Someone shouted. Hands reached for him. Then another voice cut through the confusion. Clear. Authoritative. Young. What is the meaning of this commotion? Emperor Xian stood at the garden's entrance, dressed not in ceremonial robes but in simple sleeping garments with a silk robe thrown over them. His hair was unbound, falling around his shoulders. He must have been awakened by the guard's movement, drawn from his chambers by the disturbance. 2 more guards flanked him, but his attention was fixed on the scene before him. His eyes found Ling Wei, crumpling to his knees in the grass. They widened slightly. Ling Wei tried to speak. Tried to explain. But darkness crowded the edges of his vision, swallowing the moonlight, the cherry blossoms, the concerned faces of the guards. The last thing he saw was Emperor Xian stepping forward, a strange expression on his face, not anger, not confusion, but something almost like recognition. Then consciousness fled, and he collapsed completely, the cool dampness of the grass against his cheek the final sensation before nothingness took him. Pain was the first thing that returned to Ling Wei's consciousness, a dull, throbbing ache behind his eyes that pulsed with every heartbeat. The scent of medicinal herbs and clean linen filled his nostrils, and the soft rustle of silk curtains stirred by a gentle breeze reached his ears before his vision cleared. He lay on a simple but comfortable bed in a sunlit chamber, the morning light filtering through latticed windows to cast geometric patterns on the polished wooden floor. The room was sparsely furnished, a writing desk in one corner, a shelf holding scrolls and medicinal jars, and a single chair beside his bed where Emperor Xian sat, leaning forward with an expression of genuine concern. "You're awake," the young emperor said softly, his voice carrying a weight Ling Wei hadn't heard before. "The physician said you might not wake until midday." Ling Wei tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back against the pillows. The mental exhaustion from using Heaven's Mandate Edit, SSS, still clung to him like a heavy cloak, his thoughts moving sluggishly through the fog of fatigue. He could feel the psychic link between them, the Imperial Puppet Strings, SSS+, humming quietly in the background of his mind, a constant thread connecting him to the ruler whose fate he now controlled. "Your Majesty," Ling Wei managed, his voice rough. "I apologize for my state." Emperor Xian shook his head, his dark eyes serious. "There is no need for apologies. The guards found you collapsed in the gardens last night, surrounded by something they couldn't describe. A strange energy that dissipated when they approached." He paused, studying Ling Wei's face. "They said you were protecting something. Or someone." The emperor leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I felt it, you know. A disturbance in the celestial energies around the palace. And then, The decree about increased patrols appeared in the Imperial records, signed with my seal but with no memory of issuing it. Ling Wei's mind raced, calculating the angles even through the exhaustion. This was the moment, the opening he needed to plant the seeds of trust without revealing too much. He let his expression show genuine weariness, not needing to feign the dark circles under his eyes or the pallor of his skin. Your Majesty, he began carefully, there are forces moving against the throne. Forces that use the celestial gachas not as tools of fate, but as weapons. Emperor Xian's expression tightened. Explain. Last night, I discovered something in the archives, Ling Wei said, choosing his words with precision. He reached slowly for the small pouch at his waist. The physicians had left his personal effects beside the bed, and withdrew the celestial orb. The artifact glowed with a faint, sickly light even in the morning sun, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe when stared at too long. This was meant for you, Ling Wei said, holding it out. To be used during the grand celestial gacha ceremony. It's designed to drain luck, to ensure failure on a scale that would justify certain accusations. The Emperor took the orb, his fingers tracing the unfamiliar symbols. These markings, they're not from any celestial script I've studied. They're corrupted, Ling Wei confirmed, using his ancient text interpretation skill to guide the explanation without revealing its source. Modified to serve a purpose beyond what the celestial beings intended. I believe Grand Chancellor Li obtained this through less than honorable means. He watched the Emperor's face carefully through their psychic link, sensing the turmoil beneath the calm exterior. Doubt warred with growing anger, suspicion battling against the evidence in his hands. Why would Li do this? Emperor Xian asked, though the question sounded more like he was convincing himself than seeking answers. He has served the Empire for decades. Power changes men, Ling Wei said softly. And the promise of more power changes them further. The ceremony isn't just a ritual, it's a stage. Your failure would be his opportunity to declare you unfit, to rally support for other arrangements. He reached into the pouch again and withdrew 2 scrolls he prepared weeks ago, forged documents showing payments from Li's faction to celestial priests, schedules of secret meetings, and most damningly, a copy of a proposed edict declaring the Emperor celestially deficient and suggesting a regency council headed by the Grand Chancellor. The evidence is circumstantial, Ling Wei admitted as the Emperor unrolled the scrolls. But the pattern is clear. And this orb? He gestured to the artifact. Its purpose is undeniable. Emperor Xian studied the documents, his jaw tightening with each line. Ling Wei could feel the emotions through their link, betrayal, anger, but also a dawning realization that the threats to his rule were more immediate and personal than he'd imagined. Why bring this to me? The Emperor asked finally, his eyes meeting Ling Wei's. A low-ranking eunuch risking his life to uncover a conspiracy, it's not exactly standard palace protocol. Ling Wei allowed a faint, weary smile. I serve the throne, Your Majesty. Not any man who happens to sit on it today and might be gone tomorrow. And right now, the throne is in danger. The silence that followed stretched for a full minute, broken only by the distant sounds of palace activity, the clatter of servants in the courtyards, the measured footsteps of guards on patrol. Through the window, Ling Wei could see the preparations for the grand celestial gacha ceremony already underway in the distance, banners being raised and platforms constructed in the main courtyard. They've moved the ceremony forward, Emperor Xian said quietly, following his gaze. Li announced it this morning while you were unconscious. It begins at sunset. Ling Wei's heart sank. Sunset was only hours away. And his pity counter, he focused inward, reaching for the familiar sense of accumulated failures that had become his constant companion. Nothing. An empty void where thousands of failed pulls should have been counting toward his next guaranteed drop. The Heaven's Mandate Edit, SSS, had reset his counter completely. Your Majesty, he said, forcing calm into his voice, we need to prepare. Li will have contingencies. The ceremony will proceed as scheduled, Emperor Xian interrupted, his voice firming with decision. But not as he expects. He stood, pacing to the window and back, the movements of a young ruler shedding the last of his uncertainty. You'll attend as part of my personal retinue. Close enough to observe everything. That would be unusual for someone of my station, Ling Wei pointed out. Consider it a reward for services rendered, the Emperor said, a hint of steel in his tone. And a message to those watching. I protect those loyal to me. He turned back to Ling Wei, his expression unreadable. There's something else. When I found you last night, for a moment, I felt. He trailed off, shaking his head. Never mind. Rest until the physicians clear you. I'll send someone with proper robes. After the emperor left, Ling Wei lay back, his mind already calculating. The trust had been established, fragile, tentative, but real. Emperor Xian believed him enough to bring him into the inner circle, to show favor publicly. That was the first victory. But the second problem loomed larger. He closed his eyes, reaching for the mental interface that governed his cursed gacha system. The counter showed 0. 10,000 failures wiped clean by a single SSS drop. He needed to build pity again, and quickly, but public failures during the ceremony would be noticed, especially now that he'd be in the emperor's direct presence. And there was another concern. Through the Imperial Puppet Strings, he could feel Emperor Xian's lingering doubt, the part of the young ruler that wondered why a simple eunuch would possess such knowledge, such skills. The planted evidence had worked, but it had also raised questions Ling Wei couldn't afford to answer. He sat up slowly, testing his strength. The dizziness had faded to a manageable level, though the headache remained. On the bedside table, beside a cup of medicinal tea, lay a small jade token, the mark of the emperor's personal retinue. Ling Wei picked it up, the cool stone smooth against his palm. Hours. He had only hours to prepare, to find a way to fail enough gacha pulls to build meaningful pity without attracting attention. To counter whatever Li had planned for the ceremony. To protect an emperor who was both his puppet and his charge. Outside, the sun climbed higher, marking the passage of time he couldn't afford to waste. Somewhere in the palace, Grand Chancellor Li was making his own preparations, confident in his corrupted celestial orb's absence, unaware that his plan had already been compromised. And somewhere beyond the mortal realm, the celestial beings watched, their motives still hidden, their game continuing. Ling Wei took a deep breath, the scent of herbs and impending crisis filling his lungs. He had weaponized his bad luck into control over an empire. Now he had to do it again, with the entire court watching, with no pity to spare, and with time running out faster than the sand in an hourglass. The real game was just beginning. The setting sun bled crimson across the celestial palace, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the marble courtyard. Ling Wei stood among Emperor Xian's personal retinue, his eunuch robes of deep blue silk feeling both a shield and a cage. The air hummed with anticipation, thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and the faint ozone tang of celestial energy. Before them, the grand celestial gacha altar rose in tiered obsidian steps, its surface etched with glowing silver sigils that pulsed in time with the fading light. Ling Wei's mind was a whirlpool of calculations. His pity counter had reset to 0 after using Heaven's mandate edit. 10,000 failures needed again. He watched as courtiers in embroidered silks and officials in stiff brocade gathered in concentric circles around the altar. Grand Chancellor Li stood near the front, his expression serene but his eyes sharp as daggers. Beside him stood a figure Ling Wei had only glimpsed before, the celestial envoy, draped in robes that seemed woven from starlight and shadow, their face obscured by a shifting veil of cosmic mist. The envoy's presence made the air grow colder, as if reality itself thinned around them. Emperor Xian ascended the steps, his imperial yellow robes shimmering in the twilight. The young emperor's face was pale but determined, his hands steady as he accepted the ceremonial orb from the high priest. Ling Wei could feel the emperor's nervousness through their psychic link, a faint tremor in the connection, like a plucked string. He sent a calming thought, subtle as a whisper, steady. The stars watch, but they do not command, Ling Wei's role was simple on the surface, assist with the ritual vessels. He carried a tray of 9 jade orbs, each inscribed with different celestial constellations. They were meant to be placed around the main gacha orb to amplify its power. But as he moved through the crowd, his eyes catalogued every detail. The way Li's fingers twitched toward a hidden pouch at his belt. The way the celestial envoy's gaze never left Emperor Xian. The way 2 of the gacha priests, their eyes glazed with unnatural gold, positioned themselves too close to the altar's energy conduits. Ling Wei reached the base of the altar. The main gacha orb, larger than a human head, glowed with internal light, swirling with colors like captured auroras. This was the focus of the ceremony, a single pull that would determine the empire's fortune for the coming season. Success would bring blessings, failure would be seen as heaven's disapproval. And Li had rigged it to fail. Through his psychic link, Ling Wei saw what Emperor Xian saw, the orb's energy patterns were subtly corrupted. Threads of dark energy woven into its matrix, designed to drain luck and ensure catastrophe. The emperor's hands tightened on the ceremonial orb. Ling Wei felt his anger, hot and bright. Now, Ling Wei thought. While all eyes are on the ritual. He made his move not with flashy magic, but with the clumsiness of a lowly eunuch. As he placed the jade orbs around the altar, he stumbled, a carefully calculated misstep that sent his tray clattering. 2 jade orbs rolled toward the main Gacha orb. The crowd gasped. Ling Wei lunged to catch them, his hands brushing against the glowing surface of the main orb. To everyone else, it looked like an accident. But Ling Wei focused his will, channeling a burst of psychic energy through the Imperial Puppet Strings not at the Emperor, but at the orb itself. He didn't try to fix the corruption, he amplified it. He poured his own intention into the dark threads, urging them to unravel completely. The effect was immediate. The main Gacha orb flared with violent light, then dimmed to a sickly gray. The celestial sigils on the altar flickered and died. Emperor Xian, holding the ceremonial orb, felt the connection snap. The pull failed, not just failed, but collapsed in a visible, humiliating implosion of energy. A wave of shock rippled through the court. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to open dismay. Ling Wei bowed deeply, his face a mask of contrite terror. "Forgive this humble servant, your majesty. My clumsiness has desecrated the ritual." Inside, he was counting. 1 failure. His pity counter ticked upward. But he needed more, much more, and quickly. Grand Chancellor Li stepped forward, his voice smooth as oil. "A tragic omen. The heavens themselves reject this pull. Perhaps the mandate has shifted." His eyes gleamed with triumph. The celestial envoy nodded slowly, as if confirming a prophecy. Emperor Xian's jaw tightened. Ling Wei felt the Emperor's resolve harden. Through their link, he sent another thought, ** the second orb. The one in Li's pouch. It's a backup focus, **. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Grand Chancellor," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "You seem prepared for this outcome. What is that you hold?" Li's smile didn't waver. He drew a smaller orb from his pouch, a twin to the corrupted one, glowing with malevolent energy. "A contingency, your majesty." The celestial pattern suggested instability. "I merely sought to ensure the ritual could be completed." He offered it to the high priest. "Shall we try again? With this purified focus?" Ling Wei knew this was the moment. Another public failure, engineered by Li, would shatter the Emperor's credibility. But it could also be his chance. As the high priest took the backup orb, Ling Wei moved again. This time, he didn't stumble. He used his espionage training, a flick of his wrist, a subtle distraction with a dropped handkerchief. As all eyes followed the fluttering cloth, he palmed a small disruptor crystal from his sleeve, a tool from his spy network, designed to interfere with energy flows. He pressed it against the altar's base. The backup orb flared to life. Li's expression was triumphant. But then the orb shuddered. The disruptor crystal did its work, scrambling the energy patterns. The pull failed again, this time in a spectacular shower of sparks that rained down on the altar. 2 failures. Ling Wei's pity counter climbed. 9,998 to go. No, he'd been grinding small, mental pulls in secret since awakening. His network had provided low-grade Gacha tokens, and he'd failed them all in private. He was at 9,999. Li's triumph turned to confusion, then dawning rage. "This is impossible." The focus was pure. The celestial envoy stirred, their misty veils swirling angrily. Ling Wei bowed again. "The heavens are mysterious, Grand Chancellor." Inside, he focused. 1 more failure. Just one. He had a plan. The ceremony had a third phase, a benediction pull, minor but traditional. The high priest, flustered, prepared a small personal Gacha orb for Emperor Xian to bless. It was a formality, but it counted. As the Emperor reached for it, Ling Wei reached out with his mind. Through the Imperial Puppet Strings, he didn't control, he suggested. A fleeting image of doubt, of hesitation. Emperor Xian's hand trembled. The orb slipped, clattering to the altar steps. It didn't break, but its light died. A third public failure. 10,000. Ling Wei's mind erupted with system notifications only he could see. Pity threshold reached. Selecting drop. Dynasty's Guardian, SSS. The energy didn't come from him, it tore through the fabric of reality above the altar. The sky split open, not with light, but with a profound, resonant silence. Then a figure descended. Not a warrior, not a beast, but a being of solidified starlight and ancient stone, floating gently to land before the altar. It stood 3 times the height of a man, its form humanoid but indistinct, as if seen through a prism. In its hands, it held a scroll that glowed with truth sigils. The dynasty's guardian turned its head, or the suggestion of a head, toward Grand Chancellor Li. Its voice was the sound of mountains grinding together. The threads of deception are laid bare. It unrolled the scroll. Images flashed above the crowd, Li meeting with the celestial envoy in secret chambers. Li bribing the Gacha priests with celestial artifacts. Li plotting to use the failed ceremony as pretext for a coup. The evidence was irrefutable, pulled from the very fabric of fate. The court erupted in uproar. Li's face went white. But then he laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. You think truth matters here? He raised his hand. A ring on his finger glowed with bloody light. I too have paid in failure. 10,000 of my own. He slammed his hand onto the altar, and the obsidian cracked. My pity drop. Rebel's oath, SSS. The ground shook. Not from the guardian, but from beyond the palace walls. The gates trembled, then burst inward. Through them poured an army, not of soldiers, but of Gacha-enhanced rebels. Their bodies shimmered with temporary boosts, strength of the ox, A, speed of the wind, B, skin of stone, A, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their eyes wild with fanaticism. They wore mismatched armor, but each bore a sigil, a broken chain over a Gacha orb. Li's personal symbol. At their head stood a rebel commander, a woman with scarred cheeks and eyes that burned with celestial fire. She raised a jagged sword. For a new dynasty, she roared, and the rebels echoed her, their voices a tidal wave of fury. The dynasty's guardian moved, placing itself between the rebels and the emperor. But Li was already backing away, toward the celestial envoy. The envoy's misty form thickened, wrapping around Li as if to shield him. The last thing Ling Wei saw before chaos swallowed the courtyard was Li's smile, cold, triumphant, and utterly mad, as the rebel army surged forward, and the sun finally set, plunging the world into bloody twilight. The throne room erupted in chaos as the rebel commander's Gacha-enhanced soldiers surged forward. Ling Wei's mind raced, the psychic link to Emperor Xian thrumming with shared adrenaline. The dynasty's guardian, a towering construct of shimmering celestial energy shaped like an armored warrior, stood between the throne and the advancing rebels, its form pulsing with the power of Ling Wei's hard-won pity drop. Your Majesty, stay behind the guardian, Ling Wei projected through the Imperial Puppet Strings, his physical voice lost in the clamor of clashing steel and Gacha-enhanced war cries. He could feel Xian's heartbeat through the link, fast but steady, the young emperor's training overriding panic. Through Xian's eyes, Ling Wei saw the rebel commander leap forward, her scarred cheeks twisting in a battle snarl. Her weapon, a glaive shimmering with S-rank enhancement runes, clashed against the guardian's energy shield in a shower of sparks. The impact reverberated through the psychic link, a phantom vibration in Ling Wei's temples. Left flank, 3 rebels with aura disruption crystals, Xian thought back, the emperor's tactical mind sharpening the connection. Ling Wei didn't need to speak the command. The guardian pivoted, one massive energy fist swinging to intercept the trio attempting to flank the throne. The rebels' crystals flared, attempting to destabilize the guardian's form, but the SSS rank construct merely absorbed the disruption, its form growing momentarily brighter before retaliating with a wave of concussive force that sent the soldiers crashing against marble pillars. Ling Wei moved through the chaos, his eunuch robes swirling as he dodged a rebel's energy bolt. His espionage training took over, each step calculated, each breath measured. He wasn't just a spectator in Xian's mind, he was a conductor orchestrating a symphony of violence through their shared consciousness. Guardian, focus on the commander, Ling Wei directed. The construct turned its faceless helm toward the scarred woman, who was cutting through loyalist guards with terrifying efficiency. Through the psychic link, Ling Wei could feel the guardian's programming, not just brute force, but an ancient intelligence born of celestial design. It analyzed the commander's fighting style, her enhancements, the weaknesses in her Gacha-forged armor. A rebel soldier lunged at Ling Wei, sword aimed for his throat. Ling Wei didn't flinch. At the last moment, the guardian's energy tendril shot across the room, wrapping around the attacker's wrist and snapping it with a sickening crack. The soldier screamed, dropping his weapon. Ling Wei stepped over him, his eyes never leaving the main conflict. Xian, the pillars, Ling Wei projected. He could see what the emperor saw, Grand Chancellor Li retreating toward a side exit, the celestial envoy floating beside him like a ghost in ornate robes. But more immediately, rebels were placing explosive charges against the throne room support columns. If those detonated, the entire structure could collapse on everyone inside. Emperor Xian didn't hesitate. "Guards, intercept those charges," he shouted aloud, his voice cutting through the din. A squad of loyalists broke from their defensive formation, rushing the rebels at the pillars. Ling Wei felt a surge of pride through the link. Xian was learning to trust their connection, to act on shared perceptions without question. The rebel commander noticed the diversion. She disengaged from the guardian, leaping toward Xian instead. "The puppet emperor dies first," she roared, her glaive glowing with accumulated gacha energy. Ling Wei's breath caught. The distance was too great. The guardian couldn't intercept in time. But through Xian's eyes, he saw the emperor's hand move, not toward a weapon, but toward the imperial seal at his belt. Xian's fingers brushed the jade carving, and Ling Wei felt a strange resonance through their link. The seal wasn't just symbolic, it was a low-grade gacha artifact, attuned to imperial bloodline. Now. Xian thought, and Ling Wei understood. He poured his will through the Imperial Puppet Strings, not to control, but to amplify. Xian's innate connection to the seal, combined with Ling Wei's psychic enhancement, created a feedback loop. The seal flared with golden light, projecting a dome of protective energy around the emperor just as the commander's glaive struck. The impact shook the throne room. Cracks spiderwebbed across the marble floor. The energy dome held, but flickered dangerously. Through their shared senses, Ling Wei felt the strain, Xian's spiritual energy draining rapidly, his own mental fortitude taxed to its limits. The guardian seized the opportunity. While the commander was momentarily stunned by the rebounded energy, the construct materialized behind her, its energy hands closing around her shoulders. She struggled, her gacha enhancements flaring, but the guardian's grip was absolute. With a wrenching motion, it slammed her to the floor, the impact cratering the marble. Her glaive clattered away, its glow fading. "Bind her," Xian ordered aloud, his voice strained but firm. Loyalist guards rushed forward with spirit suppression manacles. Ling Wei's attention snapped back to Li. The Grand Chancellor had reached the exit, the celestial envoy floating beside him. But instead of fleeing, the envoy was performing intricate hand gestures, celestial symbols materializing in the air around him. "He's activating something," Ling Wei projected urgently. Through Xian's eyes, they saw the truth scroll, the one the guardian had manifested to expose Li's conspiracy, begin to glow with the same celestial symbols. The scroll wasn't just evidence, it was a component in a larger ritual. "Guardian, intercept," Ling Wei commanded. The construct turned from the subdued commander, but it was too late. The celestial envoy completed his gestures. The truth scroll erupted in silver flame, consuming itself in an instant. But instead of disappearing, the flame shot upward, punching through the throne room's ceiling in a beam of concentrated celestial energy. Li smirked, his eyes meeting Ling Wei's across the chaotic room. "You think this is over, Eunuch?" he shouted over the noise. "You've only triggered the next phase." Then he and the envoy slipped through the exit, disappearing into the palace corridors. "After them," Xian ordered, but a contingent of rebels, apparently prepared for this moment, formed a rear guard at the exit, buying their leaders time to escape. The remaining rebel forces, seeing their commander captured and their leaders fleeing, began to lose cohesion. Some fought with desperate fury, others dropped their weapons, surrendering. The Guardian and Loyalist guards systematically subdued the last resistance, the construct's energy form beginning to flicker as Ling Wei's mental strain increased. When the final rebel was disarmed, an eerie quiet fell over the throne room. The air smelled of ozone, blood, and the peculiar scent of expended gacha energy, like incense mixed with lightning. Broken pillars smoldered where explosive charges had been hastily disabled. Wounded groaned on the marble floor, both rebel and loyalist. Ling Wei leaned against a cracked pillar, breathing heavily. The psychic link with Xian remained active, and through it he felt the Emperor's exhaustion, his relief, his simmering anger at Li's escape. But beneath those emotions, something else, a dawning realization of how deeply their fates were now intertwined. Xian approached, his imperial robes torn and stained. "You're injured," the Emperor said, noticing the blood seeping through Ling Wei's sleeve where a rebel's energy bolt had grazed him. "It's nothing, Your Majesty," Ling Wei replied, though the wound burned with residual gacha energy. "The Guardian will dissipate soon. The pity energy is almost expended." As if on cue, the dynasty's Guardian began to fade, its celestial form dissolving into motes of light that drifted upward like reverse snowfall. The throne room felt suddenly darker, emptier without its presence. Xian watched the fading light, his expression unreadable. That was an SSS rank drop. The pity cost must have been. He trailed off, looking at Ling Wei with new understanding. All those public failures at the ceremony. You were building pity deliberately. Ling Wei met his gaze, neither confirming nor denying. The truth hung between them, another unspoken thread in their already complex connection. Before either could speak further, a tremor ran through the palace. Not an earthquake, but something stranger, a vibration in the very fabric of reality that made the air hum. Ling Wei felt it first through the psychic link, a discordant note in the background resonance he'd come to associate with Xian's presence. Then he felt it physically. A surge of celestial energy, wild and uncontrolled, washing through the throne room. It wasn't coming from any artifact or person present. It felt external, systemic, as if the Gacha framework underlying their world had been struck like a bell. The surrendered rebels began to scream, clutching their heads. Some of the loyalist guards staggered, their Gacha-enhanced weapons flickering erratically. Even Xian winced, the imperial seal at his belt glowing with unstable light. Ling Wei's mind, already stretched thin from maintaining the guardian and the psychic link, recoiled from the surge. But through the discomfort, he understood. This wasn't an attack. This was a consequence. The celestial envoy's ritual with the truth scroll hadn't been an escape mechanism. It had been a trigger. A backup plan activated in defeat. As the energy surge peaked, Ling Wei saw visions flash behind his eyes, not through Xian's perspective, but directly into his consciousness. Glimpses of celestial machinery vast beyond comprehension. Gears of fate turning in empty space. And at the center of it all, a flaw, a crack spreading through the system's foundation. The envoy hadn't just escaped. He'd sabotaged the very source of their power. The surge passed as suddenly as it came, leaving behind a ringing silence more profound than the battle's aftermath. The throne room's remaining Gacha artifacts, the loyalists' weapons, Xian's seal, even the fading motes of the guardian, all glowed with a sickly, unstable light. Ling Wei looked at Xian through their link, and saw the same realization dawning in the emperor's eyes. The battle for the throne was over. Li was defeated, his conspiracy exposed, his forces broken. But the war for their world's fundamental nature had just begun. And somewhere in the palace's depths, or perhaps in realms beyond mortal comprehension, the celestial envoy was laughing. The throne room echoed with the aftermath of chaos. Broken tiles littered the floor where the dynasty's guardian had clashed with Gacha-enhanced rebels, and the air still hummed with residual celestial energy that tasted like ozone and burnt ambition. Ling Wei stood amidst the wreckage, his eunuch robe stained with dust and sweat, his mind racing faster than his heartbeat. Emperor Xian was nearby, directing guards to secure the captured rebel commander, a woman with scarred cheeks who glared defiance even in chains, but Ling Wei's attention was already elsewhere. He moved toward the spot where the celestial envoy had vanished. The air there shimmered faintly, a distortion in reality that smelled of incense and something metallic, like ancient coins. Kneeling, Ling Wei ran his fingers over the marble floor. It was warm to the touch, and beneath a shattered ceremonial brazier, he found what he was looking for, a hidden compartment, its edges glowing with fading celestial script. His espionage training made the discovery feel instinctual, a pressure point in the stone that yielded to a precise push. Inside lay a bundle of parchment, brittle and yellowed, wrapped in silk that dissolved at his touch. The notes were written in a flowing script that matched the envoy's elegant hand, and Ling Wei's ancient text interpretation skill allowed him to decipher them immediately. They spoke of a pity drop called Dynasty Reset, EX, not just an item, but a conceptual weapon capable of rewriting imperial history, erasing events, and reinstating dynasties from scratch. The descriptions were chillingly precise. It required a pity counter of 50,000 failures, harvested from mass public rituals, and its activation would unravel the fabric of the Celestial Empire's timeline. Ling Wei's breath caught. This was beyond Grand Chancellor Li's petty coup, this was the envoy's true endgame, a celestial scale manipulation that made Li look like a pawn. He pocketed the notes, his mind already calculating. His pity counter, reset after using Heaven's Mandate edit, had climbed again during the ceremony's engineered failures, but it was nowhere near 50,000. Still, he had accumulated enough from those public displays and the recent battle, perhaps a few thousand, scattered like psychic debris. He needed to understand the system's deeper flaws, not just exploit them. Closing his eyes, Ling Wei focused inward, reaching for the Gacha interface that existed as a phantom overlay in his consciousness. It flickered, unstable from the envoy's destabilizing ritual, but he pushed through the discomfort, a headache blooming behind his temples. With a mental command, he triggered his remaining pity, not for a grand drop, but for something diagnostic. The energy drained from him, a cold rush that left him lightheaded, and the system responded, system diagnostic, It manifested as a translucent scroll unrolling in his mind's eye, data streaming in celestial glyphs and numbers. Ling Wei's eyes widened as he read. The Gacha system wasn't a divine gift or a natural phenomenon, it was an experiment, a celestial construct designed to harvest human ambition as fuel. Every pull, every failure, every moment of hope or despair, it all fed into a reservoir that powered something beyond the empire, something the notes hinted was called the Arbiter's Forge. The pity system itself was a flaw, a safety valve that leaked ambition back to users in controlled bursts, but the envoy's ritual had cracked it open, threatening to flood the empire with raw, unstable energy. Ling Wei staggered, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. He had weaponized his bad luck, but he was dancing on a scaffold built by beings who saw humanity as livestock. The throne room's grandeur suddenly felt hollow, the gold leaf and jade carvings mere decorations on a cage. He looked at Emperor Xian, who was finishing orders to his guards, his young face etched with exhaustion but also a new hardness. Through their psychic link, Ling Wei felt the Emperor's confusion and concern, a subtle pulse in the back of his mind, like a distant heartbeat. Your Majesty, Ling Wei said aloud, his voice low but carrying across the quieting room. He approached, bowing slightly, the notes clutched in his hand. We need to speak. Privately. Xian nodded, dismissing the remaining guards with a wave. They retreated to a side chamber, its walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting celestial battles, the irony not lost on Ling Wei. He laid out the notes and shared the diagnostic findings, his words careful but urgent. The Gacha system is a harvest, he explained, pointing to glyphs that mapped ambition flows. Our struggles, our dreams, they're being siphoned. The envoy isn't just a conspirator, he's a custodian of this experiment. And this, dynasty reset, it's their ultimate tool for control. Xian listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to dawning horror. He picked up one of the parchments, his fingers trembling slightly. Solely was a distraction, the emperor murmured. A puppet in a larger play. Ling Wei nodded. But now we know. And knowledge is a weapon. He felt the psychic link between them strengthen, not from manipulation, but from shared understanding, a genuine alliance forged in the crucible of revelation. Xian met his gaze, and for a moment, the young ruler's eyes held no suspicion, only resolve. We must prepare, Xian said. If they harvest ambition, then we'll weaponize ours. Together. As they spoke, a sudden ripple passed through the air, colder than the earlier energy surge. From nowhere, a scroll materialized between them, hovering mid-air. It unrolled with a whisper, revealing elegant script that glowed with malevolent light. Ling Wei recognized the envoy's hand immediately. The message was brief, but its words froze the blood in his veins. You have interfered with the Arbiter's design. The experiment is compromised. We will return with the true Arbiters to administer punishment. The Celestial Empire shall be cleansed. The scroll then dissolved into ash, leaving only a scent of ozone and a lingering dread. Ling Wei and Xian stood in silence, the weight of the threat settling over them like a shroud. Outside, the palace was quiet, but the peace felt fragile, a breath held before a storm. The cliffhanger of their situation was palpable, not just political intrigue, but a confrontation with the architects of their reality. Ling Wei's mind raced with plans, petty calculations, and the chilling thought that his greatest weapon might be the very flaw the Arbiters had built into their system. The scent of sandalwood incense curled through the private council chamber, a thin veil of smoke that caught the late afternoon light filtering through carved wooden screens. Ling Wei stood not as a eunuch bowing in the shadows, but as a man at the emperor's right hand, his plain grey robes a stark contrast to Emperor Xian's gold-threaded dragon embroidery. The psychic link between them hummed with a new quality, not the covert manipulation of puppet strings, but the steady pulse of shared purpose. Xian's fingers traced the edge of the jade table where the celestial envoy's hidden notes lay scattered. So the Gacha system harvests ambition, he said, his voice low. Every pull, every desperate hope for power, it fuels their experiment. Ling Wei nodded. The memory of the system diagnostics revelation still burned behind his eyes, celestial machinery vast as constellations, siphoning human desire like nectar. Which means our greatest weakness is also our only weapon. My bad luck, these 10,000 failures, they've built pity outside their harvesting metrics. It's a blind spot in their design. He watched Xian absorb this. The young emperor's face, usually a mask of imperial calm, showed the faint tension at his jaw. Through their link, Ling Wei felt the weight of it, the terror of being livestock in a celestial farm, the fury at Li's betrayal, the fragile trust now extending to the man who had once been his hidden puppeteer. Then we must cultivate that blind spot, Xian said finally. But carefully. The envoy's warning. True arbiters. They will come, Ling Wei agreed. But not yet. The ritual they triggered, the system destabilization, it bought us time. The celestial machinery is repairing itself. I felt it in the visions. Cracks sealing over like healing wounds. He moved to the chamber's eastern window, looking out over the palace rooftops gleaming in the amber light. Below, courtyards bustled with guards on high alert, their armor catching glints of sun. The aftermath of the rebel assault was everywhere, scorch marks on marble where Gacha-enhanced flames had struck, repair teams hauling away debris, the subdued murmur of a court holding its breath. We need a dual strategy, Ling Wei said, turning back. Publicly, we must solidify your rule. Li's conspiracy has been exposed, but his faction still has tendrils in the ministries, the provincial garrisons. The execution must be a spectacle, not just punishment, but a reassertion of heaven's mandate. Xian's eyes narrowed. And privately? The pity grind. But not as before. Ling Wei's mind raced, piecing together fragments from the envoy's notes, from the system diagnostics data streams. The dynasty reset, EX drop, it's not just a tool. It's a key. The notes mentioned rewriting imperial history, but I think it's more. If the Gacha system is an experiment, then resetting it might mean altering the experiment's parameters. Giving us leverage against the Celestials themselves. He felt the Emperor's pulse quicken through their link. Ambition, yes, but tempered now with cold calculation. How many failures? Xian asked. The notes were incomplete. But more than the Guardian required. Possibly 50,000. 100. Ling Wei allowed a grim smile. Fortunately, I have practice. For the next hour, they plotted. Ling Wei laid out a framework, controlled, public Gacha rituals designed to fail spectacularly, each one carefully staged to appear as celestial misfortune rather than sabotage. He would use his position as the Emperor's confidant, a role now openly acknowledged, to oversee them. Meanwhile, Xian would purge Li's remnants, offering clemency to those who surrendered, ruthless justice to those who resisted. They would rebuild the Imperial Guard with loyalists, quietly incorporating Ling Wei's spy network into the palace security apparatus. The psychic link carried unspoken nuances. Ling Wei felt Xian's lingering doubt, the fear that this was just another manipulation, the ghost of the puppet string still whispering. He didn't soothe it with words. Instead, he opened a memory, the moment in the throne room when Xian had activated the Imperial Seal, Ling Wei's psychic amplification flowing into him not as control, but as partnership. The shared surge of power, the rebel commander's capture, the brief, fierce triumph before the celestial energy wave hit. Xian's shoulders relaxed a fraction. We'll need the celestial Gacha priests, he said. Some are still loyal. Others were bribed by Li. We'll have to purify the temple. Leave that to me, Ling Wei said. I have methods for detecting corruption. The eavesdropper's echo skill hummed in his mind, a subtle ache behind his temples at the thought of prolonged use. But it would be necessary. He would stand beside the priests during rituals, listening not just to their chants, but to the whispers between them. As dusk began to bleed into the sky, they moved to the execution. The palace's main courtyard had been transformed. A raised platform stood at the center, draped in black silk. Around it, ranks of soldiers stood at attention, their faces stern. Court officials and high-ranking eunuchs filled the galleries, their robes a sea of colorful silks under the torches now being lit. Ling Wei noted Eunuch Zhang and Eunuch Wang in the front row, their expressions carefully neutral. He filed that away, they would be dealt with later, quietly. Grand Chancellor Li was brought out in chains. The man who had once dominated court politics now looked shrunken, his fine robes replaced by coarse hemp. But his eyes still burned with defiance. As he was forced to his knees, he spat toward the Emperor's dais. You think this ends it? The Celestials have seen your interference. They will scour this empire clean. Xian stood, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. Grand Chancellor Li, you are found guilty of treason, bribery, and conspiring with external forces to overthrow the Celestial Empire. The heavens have witnessed your crimes through the Truth Scroll. Your rebellion has been crushed. Your allies have fled. By the mandate granted to me, I sentence you to death. He nodded to the executioner. There was no dramatic pause, no final speech. The blade fell in a clean arc. Li's head rolled, a dark stain spreading across the platform. The silence held for 3 heartbeats before a collective exhale rustled through the crowd. Ling Wei watched, his senses extended. Through his psychic link, he felt Xian's revulsion. The young emperor had never ordered an execution before, and beneath it, the steel resolve hardening. Through his own eyes, he scanned the crowd. Some looked satisfied. Some fearful. Eunuch Zhang's hands trembled slightly before he clasped them still. Afterward, in the growing darkness, Ling Wei retreated to a small, private shrine within the palace grounds. It was a place rarely used, dedicated to minor celestial functionaries, the kind of spot where a lowly eunuch might go to pray unnoticed. Now, it served a different purpose. He set a single Gacha orb on the altar. A common one, the kind used for minor blessings. No disruptor crystal this time, no tampering. He would fail this pull honestly, adding one more count to his pity grind. His hands, calloused from years of covert labor, closed around the orb. He channeled a trickle of intent, not hope for a good drop, but the opposite. A deliberate, focused wish for nothing. The orb glowed faintly, then cracked with a sound like snapping twigs. Gray dust sifted from it. Another failure. Number 10,001. As the dust settled, the vision struck. It was not like the system diagnostics data streams or the envoy's psychic message. This was deeper, older. A space of absolute blackness, but not empty, filled with presence. Vast, cold minds turning their attention like planets aligning. He saw no forms, only impressions, celestial machinery greater than worlds, gears of light and shadow, and among them, a single thread glowing with anomalous data. His thread. His 10,000 failures. A voice spoke, not in words, but in concepts etched directly into his consciousness. Asterisk anomaly detected. Pity accumulation outside designated parameters. Subject, Ling Wei. Designation, the unseen god. Threat level, ascendant. Harvest protocol suspended. Reclassification, experimental variable. Prepare for audit, asterisk. Then, sharper, a warning meant for him alone, asterisk your bad luck has made you visible. The experiment observes its own flaws. You are now the target, asterisk. The vision shattered. Ling Wei staggered back, catching himself on the altar. His breath came in ragged gasps. The psychic link with Xian flared with alarm. The emperor, in his chambers, had felt the echo of it. Ling Wei sent a pulse of reassurance, but his own mind raced. He looked down at the grey dust on his hands. The pity grind had begun anew. But now, every failure would be watched. The Celestials weren't just coming back with true arbiters. They were coming for him specifically. The unseen god, no longer hidden. In the distance, the palace bells told the hour. Somewhere, Emperor Xian was beginning the work of fortifying the empire. Somewhere, the celestial machinery continued its harvest. And Ling Wei stood in the dim shrine, the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. He had weaponized his bad luck. Now, it had drawn the eyes of gods. He brushed the dust from his hands. One failure at a time.